Hey, I'm Alex, and welcome to Hallucination. If you love true horror stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. The stories you'll hear are shared by our audience from Reddit, and to keep their original essence, I read them exactly as they were written. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? Also, check the timestamps in the comments for story titles and easy navigation. Now, let's dive into the darkness. I took a job with weird rules. I broke one. Now I'm counting down. I needed a job badly, so when an office assistant position opened up at a company I'd never heard of, I jumped on it. The interview was weird. No talk of salary, benefits, or even job duties. Just a single sheet of paper slid across the desk with a list of 10 rules. "Follow these exactly," the interviewer, a pale man in a gray suit, said. "You'll do just fine." I should have walked out, but desperation makes you ignore red flags. Rules for employment. Arrive at 8 a.m. sharp. No earlier, no later. Do not acknowledge the man in the janitor's closet. If the phone rings at exactly 12:15 p.m., do not answer it. Always leave before 6 p.m. If you hear typing from the empty cubicle, ignore it. The coffee in the break room is not for you. Never take the elevator alone. If you see your own reflection smile at you, look away immediately. The emergency exit is for emergencies only, real emergencies. Never, under any circumstances, break a rule. I should have run, but the salary was listed at an obscene number, enough to dig me out of debt and start over. I signed the contract. For the first few days, nothing happened. I did mindless paperwork, ignored the janitor's closet, and pretended not to hear the occasional burst of typing from an empty desk. My coworkers were polite but distant. No one talked about the rules. No one asked questions. By the end of my first week, I was starting to feel safe. Maybe it was all a stupid hazing ritual, a test of obedience. Then I broke a rule. It was an accident. I stayed late one night, caught up in a mountain of files. When I finally glanced at the clock, it was 6:17 p.m. My stomach dropped. The office was silent, too silent. The kind of silence that presses in on your ears. I grabbed my bag and walked quickly to the exit, my footsteps suddenly too loud. I told myself it was fine. The building hadn't exploded. No alarms had gone off. Then I heard it. Click. A single keystroke in the darkness. Then another, and another. A steady rhythm of typing coming from the empty cubicle across the room. My skin prickled. The typing stopped. I held my breath. Something shifted in the darkness. A chair creaked. Then the whisper. 6. A cold breath of air brushed against my ear, though no one was there. I ran. The next morning, the rule sheet on my desk had changed. A new rule had appeared at the bottom, typed in the same crisp font as the rest. 11. You have 6 days. I asked my coworkers about it. They wouldn't meet my eyes. One finally muttered, "Don't break any more rules." I did everything perfectly that day. I arrived at exactly 8 a.m. I ignored the janitor's closet, the phantom typing, the too warm coffee, but at 12:15 p.m., the phone on my desk rang. I stared at it. I wasn't supposed to answer, but now I had 6 days to what? To live? To work here? I needed answers. I picked up. Static hissed on the other end. Then a voice, warped and distant. 5. Click. The rules are changing. Each morning my countdown updates. 4 days. 3. I've been careful. I follow every rule. But last night, as I left the office at exactly 5:59 p.m., I caught my reflection in the glass doors. It smiled. I looked away immediately, heart hammering. But in that brief moment, I saw something move behind me in the reflection. Something tall. Something wrong. 2 days. I don't know what happens when the countdown reaches 0. No one will tell me. I just know I don't want to be here to find out. Tomorrow, I'm breaking rule #9. I'm taking the emergency exit. If I don't post again, don't take this job. Someone is taking pictures of me sleeping. It all started last week. On a quiet evening when I was scrolling through my phone, my storage was full, so I began the tedious task of deleting old photos. But then something caught my eye. A photo album titled "Sleep Well," one I didn't remember creating. appeared on the screen. The creation date was from the night before, just hours earlier. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I opened it. Inside was a picture of me, taken while I slept, vulnerable, unaware. The angle of the shot was disturbingly specific, as if the photographer had been hiding just out of view. Their presence felt only in the eerie stillness of the moment. The most disturbing detail: the picture was taken from inside my closet. I live alone. My heart dropped. I could feel the color draining from my face as a heavy pressure squeezed my chest. I was being watched. My eyes instantly darted toward the closet. As I trembled in fear, I wondered, was someone inside it? I don't know. I was too scared to look. In a panic, I immediately grabbed my car keys from beside the bed, rushed to the front door, and drove straight to the police. I arrived at the police station, feeling a strange sense of relief just for making it there. I told them everything that happened and showed the picture. The officers listened, then agreed to send someone to search my house. They searched every inch. Closets, drawers, windows. Nothing. No signs of break-ins. No clues that anyone had been there. The police told me to change my locks, install security cameras, and keep in touch in case something else happened. But it didn't feel like enough. I was terrified. The idea of someone watching me, of someone being inside my closet, haunted me. That night I opened the closet fully, convinced that if I could see inside, I could rid myself of the fear. But something felt off. I could still feel the presence, like someone was right there, just beyond my sight. The weight of paranoia suffocated me. Unable to sleep, I went to the kitchen to make something to eat. I called my friend Melissa and told her what happened with my voice shaking. I made myself some popcorn and went back upstairs to my room. Still talking to her, trying to sound calm, I noticed something wrong. I stopped mid-sentence. My breath hitched. The closet door that I had left wide open was now closed, but not fully. There was a slight gap, a narrow sliver, just enough for me to know that someone, or something, was inside. I couldn't see who or what, but I could feel it, the pressure of being watched. My eyes locked on the gap, heart hammering in my chest. Then I saw it, a single white eye staring back at me from the darkness. My voice trembled as I spoke. "Hello? Are you still there?" Melissa asked, confused by my sudden silence. I couldn't answer. My body was frozen. Someone was inside the closet, I was sure of it. I slowly pulled my bedroom door shut, my hands shaking as I gripped the doorknob. I locked it. Then, with my heart racing, I ran outside and called the police as I stood in my yard, too terrified to go back in. When the officer arrived, I rushed to explain. I locked him in my room. I swear, they're in the closet. They were watching me. The officers moved quickly, their hands steady, trained. They entered my room, opened the closet door, and nothing. No one. The closet was empty. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. The room was on the second floor, with windows secured by metal bars. No exit, no secret passage. The officer returned to me, his face tight with frustration, his politeness wearing thin. "Ma'am, I know you're scared, but you can call us every time you forget you closed your closet door. Be sure to only call us when you're certain it's an emergency. I suggest you sleep somewhere else until you've recovered from this panic." "What? Are you sure you searched everything?" "They must have escaped," I said, my voice trembling with remorse and disbelief. I felt the walls closing in. How could they have missed something? How could they not see it? "As I said, the house is empty," the officer replied, his tone cold and dismissive. I felt my frustration growing. This wasn't right. There was someone there. I couldn't shake the feeling, the cold certainty gnawing at me. No, you have to believe me. There was someone in there. I locked the door. I swear, there's no way they could have gone anywhere. My house is locked down. Please, search again. I insisted, my voice rising in desperation. The officer gave me a long look, clearly fed up. "Ma'am, we've been over this. The house is empty. Nothing's here. I suggest you take a step back and calm down. We can't keep coming back every time you think someone's in your closet." His words hit me like a slap, each one a cold dismissal of everything I had experienced. I stared at him, fighting to hold back tears. But I saw them. I saw their eye. "Get some rest." He cut me off, turning on his heel. "We're done here." Reluctantly, I followed the officer's advice and went to sleep at Melissa's house. She's my best friend, and being with her felt like the only place I could be safe, at least for that night. Melissa tried to lighten the mood, but I could hear the nervousness in her voice. Are you sure this picture isn't just some joke from someone messing with your head? I forced a weak laugh, but it was hollow. No, I'm sure about what I saw. There's someone watching me. I didn't want to talk much. My mind was racing, but the words wouldn't come. I hadn't been able to explain it properly to the police, and now I couldn't explain it to her. The fear was too real. Melissa's husband was out of town, so I ended up sleeping next to her. I was too scared to sleep alone. That night, I finally felt a little safer, a little less alone. The next morning, things felt better. Being with my closest friend gave me a sense of comfort. I ate breakfast, tried to distract myself, but there was one thing I couldn't shake. The picture. I had to know. I had to see it again. Melissa asked, "Can you show me the picture again?" I didn't want to look at it, but I opened my gallery anyway. I could feel my heart thudding in my chest. I stared at the album for a moment. Before clicking on it, my stomach dropped. There was another picture in the album, a new one. I zoomed in. I couldn't believe it. It was a picture of me, but this time, I wasn't alone. Melissa was lying beside me, just like the night before, but the perspective was wrong. It was too close. Whoever took the picture was right next to us. And in their hand, they were holding something, a rag doll. The doll looked just like me. The same dark hair, the same clothes, the exact same features. Even the expression on its face mirrored mine. The doll was lying in the same position I was, as if it had been placed there beside me, sleeping. In the background, I saw the shadow of who took the picture. My heart stopped. My hand shook as I dropped the phone. The safety I had felt with Melissa was gone. All that comfort I had wrapped myself in vanished, replaced with a cold, suffocating fear. I wasn't safe anywhere. Melissa tried to calm me down, but it wasn't working. My panic was too overwhelming, and she could see that I was shaking, unable to catch my breath. Desperate to understand what was happening, she quickly reached down and grabbed my phone from the floor. Her fingers trembled as she opened the photo album, her eyes scanning the picture I had just shown her. Okay, this doesn't make any sense, she muttered, her voice tight with confusion. She looked at me, then back at the photo. Her brow furrowed as she tried to make sense of it, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Are you sure this isn't just some sick prank? Something someone's been sending you? Maybe an ex or someone you know? I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. No, Melissa, I swear, it's not a prank. This is real. Someone's in my life, and they're watching me. Her expression faltered for a moment, and I saw her hesitate, her eyes darting nervously around the room as if she could feel the weight of something watching her too. Slowly, she handed the phone back to me, but this time I noticed her hand was shaking. Do you think it could be here too? In my house? She asked quietly, her voice laced with a hint of fear. I swallowed hard, my own breath catching in my throat. I don't know, but I don't feel safe anymore. I don't think I'm safe anywhere. Melissa's eyes widened slightly, and she stood up from the bed looking around the room. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I don't know. I heard some noises last night, but I thought it was just the house settling. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to worry you. The fear in her eyes mirrored my own. For the first time, I realized I wasn't the only one feeling watched. I think we need to check the house, just in case, she said, her voice trembling as she grabbed her phone, preparing to call someone for help. Her eyes were wide, her body tense, as she waited for my response. Melissa looked at me, her face pale with concern. We need to go to the police, she said, her voice firm despite the obvious fear in her eyes. You can't keep dealing with this alone. If someone's really doing this to you, they need to know. I shook my head, a knot of anxiety forming in my chest. The police won't believe me, Melissa. I've already been there. They searched my house and found nothing. They said I'm just imagining things. They don't take me seriously. Melissa's face softened, but her voice remained steady as she reached for my hand. No, this time it's different. We have proof, remember? She looked at the photo on my phone, her eyes scanning it once more before locking with mine. They can't just ignore that. I hesitated. The memory of the police officer dismissing me echoed in my mind, but Melissa was right. We had proof, and I couldn't just let this go. All right, I said, voice barely above a whisper, but if they don't believe me again, we'll make them believe you, she said, determination in her tone. We'll show them the photo, everything. We have to do something. I arrived at the police station, feeling a mix of dread and urgency. As soon as I walked in, I saw the same officer from the night before. When he saw me, his face immediately twisted into a scowl. He was not happy to see me again. He didn't even bother to greet me. "You again?" he muttered under his breath, rolling his eyes. "Officer, we need your help," I started, holding my phone up with the picture. "Please, I'm telling you, someone's been taking pictures of me while I sleep." He glanced at the photo, his patience already running thin. "You're still going on about this?" He rubbed his forehead, clearly annoyed. "I already told you, there's no sign of a break-in, no evidence of anyone being inside your house. What do you want me to do? Investigate every closet in the city?" I could feel the knot of fear tightening in my chest as I desperately tried to explain. "But you don't understand. This picture, it's not just a prank. Someone's still watching me." Melissa, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "We don't have any more evidence, but we've checked everything. The house is empty, but she's still seeing things. This picture..." The officer cut her off with a harsh wave of his hand. "Enough with the photo," he snapped, clearly not believing either of us. "I've already done my part. If you two are gonna waste my time, I suggest you find another way to deal with this." He took a deep breath, then sighed in frustration, clearly not wanting to deal with this anymore. "All right," he said. "We'll go to your place and search your house again, but don't expect me to find anything." The officer came with us, walking into Melissa's house like it was just another job. He searched every room with annoyance, even though we had already checked everything ourselves. We stood in the living room, the tension growing as we waited for him to come out. When he finally emerged from the last room, his face was contorted with anger. "There's nothing here," he said sharply. "No sign of a break-in. No one's been here. So stop wasting my time." I couldn't hold it in anymore. "But the closet, someone was in there. They're still watching me. Please, you have to understand. I'm not making this up." He shot me an angry look, his voice turning cold. "I've been through your house, and I haven't found a damn thing. You really think I've got time for some prank? Some sick joke? You two think this is funny?" Melissa and I exchanged a look, both of us trying to process the officer's words. My heart sank as I realized the officer was done taking us seriously. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "I'm not going to keep playing along with this. No more emergency calls. You two should find a way to get some rest instead of dragging me into your delusions." He turned and walked toward the door, leaving us standing in the middle of the room, shocked and speechless. The door slammed behind him with a finality that made my whole body tense up. Melissa just stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. Silence. Complete silence filled the room as Melissa and I stood there in disbelief. "I need to go home. It's watching me, not you. Me being here is just putting you in danger," I said, with my eyes welling up with tears. "Are you crazy? I'm not letting you go anywhere until we catch this motherfucker. You're my best friend. I love you and I'll go through hell to help you," Melissa said, hugging me tightly. Her words were comforting, but fear still consumed me. I honestly didn't know what I would do without her. "I'm not sleeping tonight," I said, my voice firm. "But remember, you have work tomorrow," Melissa reminded me. "Work? How could I possibly work and pretend like nothing happened after everything I'd experienced?" The fear was slowly turning into anger. I spent the whole day thinking about what happened, feeling like I was being watched everywhere I went. Melissa called her boss and told them she was sick so she could stay with me. I fucking love her. We spent the entire day coming up with theories about what was going on. Maybe whatever was watching me wasn't human. Nah, I don't believe in supernatural stuff, but Melissa kept insisting. Nighttime came. As I said, I refused to sleep. Even if I wanted to, I don't think I could. But Melissa couldn't stay awake for long. I felt exposed with her asleep, but I wasn't about to wake her up. I just had to stay awake, and that's exactly what I did. Hours passed, and nothing happened. The only thing I could hear was Melissa's soft snoring, but time felt agonizingly slow, and my fear only grew. 3 a.m., the so-called haunted hour that makes both adults and children alike dread what might happen next. Even though I didn't believe in supernatural things, when I saw 3 o'clock on the clock, my heart sank. I was expecting something, some noise, a reflection, a doll, or the most disturbing thing I could imagine, but nothing happened. 20 minutes went by, and I started to feel extremely sleepy, but I knew as soon as I slept, I wouldn't be safe anymore. I glanced at Melissa. something felt off. She wasn't snoring anymore. She had turned to the other side, and I could only see her brown hair splayed across the pillow. I froze. Something about her posture made me uneasy. I had never seen her sleep like that before. Slowly I sat up, my heart racing in my chest. I lifted my head and cautiously leaned forward to see if she was awake. But when I looked, my blood ran cold. What I saw was not my best friend anymore. There in front of me was a body. The skin was unnaturally pale, the once vibrant brown hair now a tangled mess. Her mouth hung slightly open, and her eyes, those eyes that I knew so well, were wide open but lifeless, glazed over with an unsettling emptiness. The way her limbs were arranged, twisted unnaturally at odd angles, told me she hadn't just fallen asleep. No, something had happened to her. I wanted to scream. My throat closed up. I reached out and desperately shook her, calling her name, trying to wake her, but there was no response. Her body was cold, stiff. I tried again, harder this time. Nothing. No breath. No movement. Melissa was dead. Panic surged through my veins, my vision blurry with tears. I fumbled for my phone, trying to dial emergency services, but just as my fingers brushed the screen, something stopped me. An airdrop request flashed across the top of my phone. My heart dropped. I hesitated, staring at the screen, the dread tightening in my chest. I wanted to deny the request, to throw my phone away, to make it all stop, but I couldn't. My mind screamed at me to say no, but my hand moved on its own. I accepted. A flood of pictures appeared on my phone, and my stomach twisted. The images were of me, sleeping. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe, scattered over weeks. Some were taken inside my closet, others were shots of me lying in my bed, blissfully unaware. But what made my blood run even colder were the ones that came after. There was a picture of me, sleeping beside something on the bed. It looked like the same doll I had seen before, but this time it felt different, wrong. It wasn't just a doll anymore. It was me, or something that had been made to look like me, in doll form lying beside me. The most disturbing part, the shadow of someone standing just behind it, watching, waiting. I couldn't move. The air around me grew thick, suffocating, and then through the crack in the door, I saw it. A figure, tall and unnervingly still. It was standing there as if waiting, watching. But the most terrifying part was the eye. That single wide eye staring directly at me from the shadows. It was unnatural, too large, too black. No light reflected off of it. It was like a hole in the world, a deep, endless void that seemed to pull every ounce of warmth and life from the room. The eye twitched, just slightly, as if it recognized me, like it had been waiting for me to look. And in its other hand, the doll. But it wasn't just any doll. The doll was me. I recognized the face immediately. Its pale skin, the dark hair, the same expression I often wore when I slept. But it was wrong. The doll's eyes were wide open, fixed in a grotesque stare, its mouth frozen in a twisted, silent scream. Its body, rigid and contorted in a way that a human body never could be, seemed to mock me, like an unnatural imitation of myself. The figure held it with such tenderness, as if cradling it, but there was something deeply disturbing in the way it did. The doll's hand was positioned just like mine when I slept, but there was no softness to it. And then the figure stepped forward, the eye never leaving mine. The room grew colder, and the figure moved silently, like a shadow creeping closer, carrying the doll as if it were the most precious thing in the world. I felt the terror clawing at me, suffocating me, but I couldn't look away from that horrible hollow eye. It was as if it was looking through me, and the more I stared, the more I felt like I was becoming part of its dark, empty world. I could feel my body shutting down, my heart thundering in my chest, as if it was trying to escape my ribs. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, my breathing shallow and erratic. My limbs felt weak, like they were made of stone, and my vision started to blur around the edges. The air felt like it was closing in, pressing against me from all sides, and the figure, the eye was all I could see. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, louder and louder, drowning everything else out, until the sound was all-consuming. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, everything went black. I'm currently writing this on a contraband cell phone in prison after allegedly poisoning my best friend. It's all a lie, of course. They say I did it, but they don't understand. They don't know what I saw, what really happened. Melissa is gone. I can still feel the weight of that truth crushing me. I can still hear her laugh, See her smile, feel her presence beside me like I always did. I feel the coldness now. It's unbearable. Losing her, it's like losing a part of myself. The world feels hollow, like it's spinning around me without any meaning. The grief is suffocating. But the worst part isn't the grief. It's the frustration, the anger bubbling inside me. They think I did it. They think I'm the one who poisoned her. They don't see how broken I am, how lost I feel. They don't understand that I would never hurt her. I would never do something like that. But it doesn't matter what I say. They have their own version of the truth. And now they've locked me away for something I didn't do. They'll never know what really happened. They'll never know what I saw in that room, what I saw in her eyes before everything turned dark. I couldn't escape before. Now I certainly can't. They've got me here in this cold metal cage. But maybe I can. There's still one thing I can do. I'm the only one who can put an end to this, to everything. The figure is still watching me. I can feel it. That same eye, always lurking, always waiting. It's still out there, haunting me. I thought maybe, just maybe, being locked up would give me a break from the constant fear, but no, it follows me. It's always watching. I don't know how long I can keep going, how long I can pretend that I'm okay. I can't take it anymore. The nightmares, the paranoia, the guilt, they all blur together. I miss Melissa. I miss her so much. I love you, Melissa. I always will. I can't wait to join you. The trumpet player won't stop playing, and it's making me lose my mind. My life has been collapsing around me like a house of cards. Pieces fluttering down around me like leaves as it gets worse and worse. My mind felt like it was being shredded and mashed into a ball again and again. It started only 3 days ago after a concert I played at. I play the trumpet for my college's orchestra. I make a decent amount of money from it, but it is mostly for the credit hours. Playing my trumpet during the show was probably the last time I felt any sense of calm or happiness. I noticed him first when I was walking to my car, my trumpet in a case in my hand. It was silent, and most of the audience and musicians already left. I had hung around for a while to talk to some friends and help put chairs and other stuff away. The cold fall air blew leaves across the asphalt. Amber light bathed the lot weakly. There was only one lamppost. As I put my case into the passenger seat, I was startled by a loud noise, hitting my head on the roof of the car. I cursed, looking around the empty lot. I had recognized the sound as a trumpet blaring a note. My eyes landed on a figure under the lamppost, holding a trumpet. I could not get a good look at them to see their face clearly, but I could see that they were wearing a black suit and had dark skin, with a trumpet held to their lips, head bowed. "Good one, asshole," I yelled, a little amusement in my voice. I was much more chill about that sort of thing back then. I did not recognize them. I knew everyone in the band, or at least I thought I did, but I did not give a second thought as I got into my car and drove away. I got home, put my stuff away, got ready for bed, and climbed into bed. It was a long day, and I had an early class the next day. As my eyes closed and I was falling asleep, I was launched out of sleep by a loud noise. Another trumpet blast. I sat up in bed, looking around. The streetlight outside my window projected a shadow onto my curtains. No way that's him, I thought. I strode out of bed to the window, reaching out to open them. Another toot of the trumpet met me as I did, bathing me in sterile blue light from the LED streetlight, but there was nothing. I thought about going outside to look, but I decided against that or calling the police. One seemed dangerous, and the other probably wouldn't work. Why would they believe me? I just made sure my doors and windows were locked, and went back to sleep. I shot awake again. The trumpeter had played once again. This time, though, it wasn't just a single note. It was a jazz-like scale, and it was louder. I looked around, but my room was empty. I got up and turned the light on. Dum-dum. The trumpeter played again, but I can hear it much more clearly. It was outside my bedroom door. I stood still like a statue. I was scared then. Someone was in my apartment. I lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment with a combined living room and kitchen, with a hallway leading to the bedroom with a bathroom leading off it. I was also stuck, unless I wanted to go out the window. Dum-dum. They played again, louder now, closer to the door, close to giving me a headache. "Gee, get out," I yelled, my voice stuttering a bit. "I have a gun." Dum-dum. The trumpet's music resounding through the door after my empty threat rang out, like it was a taunt, knowing I had no gun or any weapon. I looked around again and pushed my desk against the door. I made the split-second decision to call the police, telling them someone broke into my house. The intruder with the trumpet kept playing, their music becoming more and more complex. I heard the police knock, announcing themselves, the music stopping in the middle of a scale, right before the officers came in. My heart jumped in relief, but then it plummeted when they approached my door without confronting the intruder. "Sir, are you okay? Can you please open the door?" one asked. I complied, already asking if they saw anyone. They both confirmed they did not. But there was someone here. I felt lightheaded, hysterical. They were playing a trumpet, and one of the officers interrupted me. "Excuse me, a trumpet? We did not hear anything." They looked at me questioningly. I stammered. "They didn't hear any of that? It stopped the second they opened the door. And how didn't they see anyone?" My eyes lit up as an idea came to my mind. "The operator," I exclaimed. They had to have heard it. The cops looked at each other, one slowly reaching for his radio, an obvious look of reluctance and annoyance on his face, as he asked the operator if they heard anything during the call. They said no, just me. I sputtered, uttering dozens of buts. The pair's looks of annoyance were replaced with pity. They probably thought I was either crazy or on something. I just decided to apologize, and they left. I was lucky I didn't get a ticket or something. Whatever the trumpeter was doing, or what they were, apparently no one could hear. Maybe it was a mental thing. Too much of my own playing. I decided to try bed again. It was late, and I still had an early class. The dread of having to wake up early after a late night almost superseding the dread of the intruder. I couldn't sleep. Periodically it would play through the night and early morning. I decided to just get up early and get to class. I don't know why I did not check myself into a mental hospital or something. I went to brush my teeth, groggily lumbering around my room and bathroom. Bags were under my eyes, which themselves were bloodshot and red. My reflection in the mirror overall was haggard and not pretty. As I went to spit, my head going down towards the sink, a trumpet blared in my ear. With a cry I shot up, spraying toothpaste and saliva all over. In the mirror though, through a crack in the door, was a trumpet sticking out over halfway, a dark-skinned hand working the valves on it as it played a scale, before slowly being pulled back out. I stood there, tears welling in my eyes from fear. I locked the door, finished getting ready, and after some time stepped into the hallway. No one was in the apartment. I grabbed my stuff and quickly got dressed, and went out to my car. I was shaking a bit. I think I was in shock to some degree. I decided to try to get through the day, see if it gets worse. I told myself maybe it was some sort of hallucination. Not exactly a good thing, but it was better than the alternative. Something was messing with me. I drove towards campus, trying to calm down. Dum, dum, dum. I slammed on the brakes, my ears ringing from the blare of a trumpet from my back seat. I swung my head around to my empty back seat. A moment of relief coursed through me as another thunderous salvo from the trumpeter came from outside the driver's side window. I looked out to the end of a trumpet in my face from the other side of the glass. But besides the slow flutter of fingers on the trumpet's valves, or the dark tuxedo, I saw something else. The trumpeter's cheeks were extended past the outside of the flared end of the trumpet, far past what a human can do. Sickeningly tight and distended, straining against the pressure from the air in the man's mouth. I could see it was a man now. His bald head was shiny, along with the rounded mounds that were his cheeks. I blinked, and he was gone. I stared blankly until a car blasted its horn behind me, and I tentatively went back to driving. Class was just as bad as you would think. I made it through about 15 minutes before I had to leave. The trumpet player was not in the room, but he was playing somewhere in the building, his playing echoing around the old hall. I calmly left the classroom like I was going to the restroom, but then broke into a sprint outside the room. I had to leave, run, do something. I sprinted for a minute before realizing I was lost. I only really knew where my classroom was. The hall was an old building that not only was large, but maze-like. I was in a hallway, the lights dim. It was empty, and I was sure that there were no classes in session in any room that radiated out from it. I tentatively stepped into it, trying to find an exit, when I heard the dreaded sound. Doom-dum-dum. I turned, and he was there, standing in the corner that extended into the hallway I was standing in. I slowly walked backwards, and stopped. Once again frozen in place by fright. I could see his eyes now, two giant swollen orbs that were being pushed out of his skull, straining against his eye sockets to pop out like a cartoon characters when they see something shocking. I could move, think, or even breathe. But suddenly the trumpet blared into a long, loud note as he slid across the linoleum floor, still standing unmoving, just gliding as the trumpet sounded its note, like a battle cry during a cavalry charge. I snapped out of my shock and ran again. As I sprinted down the long hall, the roar of the trumpet on my heels, the lights in front of me started to go out, one by one. I was running into the dark. After a few seconds of the chase, all the lights were off, and the blaring ended. I stopped too, looking back to where the trumpeter was. I heard nothing. I craned my neck and turned my head, so my good ear was facing where the monstrous musician was before. Nothing. I sighed in relief. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, turning the flashlight on it on. I turned back around and nearly walked into the flared end of the trumpet, blue light reflecting off a pair of milky white eyes with giant red blood vessels, pupils darker than the space between stars in the night sky. They looked like they were going to pop out of his skull, swollen to tennis ball size, his trumpet blaring again. I ran the other way. Luckily, I didn't drop my phone. I went to the student clinic. I told them I was seeing and hearing things. I was shaking and sobbing, nearly inconsolable. But the nurse who finally got to me told me it was anxiety. I was dumbstruck by the audacity. She explained it was a response to the stress a music grad student like me was under. I chuckled, but then I heard the trumpet somewhere in the building and laughed. I felt nothing now. I walked out of the clinic. I walked to my car and left the school. The hysteria I felt was short-lived as dread filled me once again. I had gotten dozens of texts and calls from concerned friends and classmates asking about why I left the class and why I was screaming in the hallways. I do not remember screaming then, but I am not surprised. I just went to my apartment. As I walked into my bedroom, I saw my own trumpet still in its case. I grabbed it and threw it into the trash outside. A funeral song of jazz played in the background, likely from my house. I had no idea what the trumpeter wanted, what he was, or any idea why he chose me. I sat on my bed, spiraling, trumpets blasting around me. He was in the walls, under the bed, the closet, everywhere. More and more notes and scales blared about me. I slammed my hands to my ears and screamed, "Stop it, stop it, stop it." As loud as I could, my voice growing hoarser and hoarser and the taste of copper permeating throughout it. The closet door opens and the musician fucking slides out sideways, from halfway up the door horizontal to the floor in the same pose he always was in. I ran out of the room and into my bathroom, cowering in there again for the second time that day. Hours of trumpet, and my ears stung, and a migraine was splitting my skull. Screaming at him to stop did not do anything. I knew I had to do something, so I threw open the door and ran to the kitchen, a jazz theme playing as I did, unbearably loud. I grabbed a knife from the block on the counter and turned to find the musician. He stood in the end of the hallway, head tilted forward as if he were trying to see me better over the instrument. Eyes still bugging out in all directions, inches off his face, cheeks like an overstuffed chipmunk's. We locked eyes. He continued to play, and I dashed toward him and stabbed him in the stomach with an underhand motion. He did not stop. He did not even stutter his playing. The weapon stuck in him, and pulling at it did nothing. I stepped back empty-handed as the musician slowly looked down, back at me, and raised his hand, not working the valves, shaking his finger at me slowly in a mock disapproving way. He then grabbed the knife and pulled it out of his stomach, with no blood, not on the blade or the tux, as well as not even leaving a hole in the jacket. He dropped the knife to the floor and went back to his usual stance. A second later, he disappeared. My apartment echoed still with even louder, more fast and frantic music. No longer was it playing music, it was just a loud and sharp sound, designed to punish. Like if you put the mouthpiece of the trumpet to a truck's exhaust as it stuttered, creating jagged blasts of noise each loud enough to stab at your eardrums. My mind felt like it was melting. I cried, screamed, laughed, cried every curse at the musician, cheered him and told him to play louder, and much more. I punched walls, tore assignments, broke my TV and mirror, but at some point the insane revelry ended, and I had fell asleep. However, I was woken up by the trumpeter, the dum-dum of his usual scale vibrating my bedroom. I was on my bed, no covers on. I went to sit up before realizing I could not move. Sleep paralysis. Of course, I thought. Why not? I decided to close my eyes, still exhausted from my hysterical night previously. But the trumpet got louder and louder until I could feel air on my face. He was right there, bent over to play right in my face. It hurt so much. My ears were ringing, my head pounding, and the blaring vibrated my bones. But I knew he wanted me to look. I had to hold out, have some sort of victory against this demon, because that is what he had to be, a demon. But that demon won out after seemingly hours of blaring in my face. But it could have been minutes too. Time was being bent by this trumpeter that was terrorizing me. A black hole bending time around it. I opened my eyes. He was suspended in the air, right above me, still in his stance, floating trumpet facing me. Even in the dark of the room, I could see his eyes bugged out, cheeks puffed out, straining and taut, his trumpet barely an inch away from my face, with his eyes equal to mine. I could not move. I could not scream. I stared into his face, too scared to close them in case he did anything while they were closed. We were like this until morning, where he suddenly disappeared. My laptop was still functional after my hysteria, although with a crack. I need to tell people what happened. This demon won't ever leave me alone. I can never play trumpet, my passion that I worked for over a decade to master even if it did, but he will not leave me alone. No matter what I will hear, and likely see him. I could not stand the music he made. It was non-stop now, a barrage of almost deafening music that went from normal jazz trumpet to a schizophrenic wail, so I decided to make it stop. I sharpened 2 pencils until they were razor sharp, stuck them into my ears, and pushed until the white-hot pain of my eardrums being punctured, paired with the sound of their destruction, and the trumpeter's music, slightly lowered. I could not hear anything. But the trumpet. I laughed. I can't escape him. Blood is freely running down my neck and shoulders, red and hot. As I write this, he is behind me, a hand on my shoulder. My kitchen knife sits on my desk. I do not know why he chose me. Why does he want to drive me insane? But I only know I cannot bear it. This is not a call for help. It is too late for that. But hopefully, if you ever see a trumpeter whose eyes are the size of tennis balls, and his music is supernaturally loud, just end it before it's too late. God help you if he finds you, because nothing else can or will. Night Road Terror. Let me preface the story by saying that I always thought that the supernatural does not exist. To my knowledge, nothing creepy has ever happened to me or my family. I never believed in horror stories or the like. I have not seen my father in a long time, so when the invitation came, I gladly took the offer. It has been a year and a half since my last visit. When I arrived, we talked a bit about the time we all lived in Colorado. When my mom and him were still together, after they broke up, he moved to Pennsylvania. I always wondered why he didn't stay in Colorado. With the money he earned, he could have easily had a 4-room apartment and keep his friends. I asked him this time. I thought, whatever reason he would give, I'd understand. We are both adults after all. I was not prepared for his story. He told me that he used to be a truck driver back in the 90s, mostly delivery and pickups. He traveled all across Utah, and one time he accepted a delivery to Oklahoma, a well-paid easy job. It was winter and he was driving to the delivery point. He was very relaxed, admired the beautiful winter landscape. Business as usual. He reached the delivery point, unloaded his cargo and drove back. He did have to take a different road, however, due to snow blocking the interstate he used to get there. So he is driving back, passing a few small villages and into the woods. He has been driving for 20 or 30 miles by now. No other cars present. He was paying attention to the road as he saw a man standing on the side. I thought it was a tree stump at first. My father says I thought he was lost. Why would you wander the woods in winter? My dad hit the brakes, but due to the snow, the truck kept sliding down the road. After a glance in the rearview mirror, he saw the man still standing there. So my dad leaned out the window and yelled, "Hey, do you need a ride?" The man slowly turned around, stared for a few seconds, and then slowly started approaching. It was at this point I felt something being wrong. I can see my dad's hand shaking. I mean, at first he looked like a normal guy: jeans, a gray t-shirt, a cap, sports shoes. But as the man came closer, my dad noticed his eyes. They were easily 3 times the size of normal human eyes, and his upper teeth were protruding from under his lips. My dad shat himself, rolled up the window and floored it. The man started chasing him. My dad sped up, but the man kept running after him. At this point he is driving 60-70 miles per hour, but the strange man still keeps up. Then another joins him, and then 3 more run out of the forest and give chase. My father was bawling at this point. Either I lose control of the truck and crash, or those creatures do me in, were his thoughts at the moment. He does not remember how he got out of the forest. The creatures did not follow him beyond the tree line. My father drove straight to a gas station, you know the kind, with cheap food and shitty parking. Tears streaming down his face, he told the gas station owner everything. Yet that dude was just laughing at my father, saying that he should cut down on the booze, otherwise hell see more things like that. So after a while my dad was fuck it. The owner clearly didn't believe him. My dad ordered some whiskey, paid for the parking spot, and went to sleep in his truck. I woke up at night, my dad says, had to use the bathroom. It was dark. No lights were on, so my father decided to switch on the car lights to get to the toilet. Once the sweepers ran across the windshield, he saw the creatures stand around him. 10 of them, my dad says, and his voice almost fails him. 10 of them standing around staring at me with those abominable eyes. One had blood dripping down from his mouth. My dad's only thought was fuck. He hit the signal horn. The truck roared and the creatures scattered. My dad immediately floored it from the gas station, speeding all the while. The worst part, he says, was not seeing anything. If they were chasing me still, he drove through to Colorado without sleeping. After this, my father developed a habit of getting up at night and looking out the window. He says that he began to fear the creatures, that they found out where he lives. And one night he saw them, 3 of them, standing underneath the streetlight, staring up at him with those horrible eyes of theirs. My father immediately bolted the door, covered up the windows, and called up a friend who was also staying late. He spent the entire night talking to his friend, so he wouldn't feel alone. Next day, my father immediately packed a bag and got on a train to Connecticut to visit some relatives. From there, he put up his flat on sale and moved to California. He now lives in the center of the city in a rundown 2-room apartment. But at least I never saw those creatures again, he says. What the thunder brings. The farmland surrounding my grandparents' ranch was dry and torn open by deep cracks within the once so fertile ground. There was nothing to be harvested, sown, or watered anywhere in sight. It was the summer of '95, in which the view over this barren piece of land was what greeted me every morning, as I drew open the curtains of the small upstairs room I inhabited. My grandparents couldn't manage the stairs on their own anymore, so I practically had all the second floor for myself, even though I didn't know what to do with that much space. After a failed attempt at a college degree, I had overestimated my interest in literature by much. Helping out my family was the least I could do. I hadn't managed to secure a job anyway. When my mother asked me if I would mind supporting my grandparents on their remote piece of land for some time, I enthusiastically agreed. This way I would feel a little less useless, I hoped. In my youth I had enjoyed the visits to their farm. I clearly remembered how amazing it had felt to explore the fields, barns, and secret paths around the house. Upon my return, I was confronted with a first impression that differed much from what I remembered. The land was barren and dry, no corn obstructing the view. The windows of many of the farms I passed by nailed shut. It hadn't rained in a long time. My mother had already told me that my grandparents wouldn't have a chance in harvesting anything that year, even if they would magically regain all their youthful strength. The weather was putting the residents of the area to the test. To me, it didn't matter much. My grandparents had saved up quite a bit during their lifetime of work. They weren't harvesting anymore anyway. Now they simply wanted to live in peace in the beloved surroundings of their home for the rest of their days. No matter how much the few relatives we had urged them, no one could convince them to move out of the remote house. My grandma has been a bit weak and fragile ever since I can remember, but my grandfather's recent stroke had changed their lives a lot. They needed someone to fix things around the house, buy groceries, make dinner, and so on. So that was my job now. While their bodies were slowly giving in to their age, mentally my grandparents had stayed surprisingly fit. This was a very pleasant surprise. I didn't feel much like a caretaker, and more like a friend staying over. While we had quite some fun playing board games and sharing stories in the late hours of the evening, I especially enjoyed the quiet beers I sometimes had with my grandfather after I rolled his wheelchair out onto the porch at sundown. The evening I want to tell you about had started exactly like that. The day had been especially hot and muggy. I watched the drops of condensation roll down the can in my hands. It felt just right. I actually thought that I hadn't been this satisfied with my life in a long time. The sound of liquid dripping onto the wooden floor ripped me out of my thoughts. My grandfather was often a bit shaky, but that day it was more intense. Some of his beer had slopped out of the can. The moment I noticed, the stains on the wooden floor had already begun to dry. He looked at me, his lips pressed together tightly. Something felt away. I took another sip and then decided to ask. My inquiry as to what was wrong was answered only after a long pause. "It smells like rain," he said. "I think we shouldn't stay outside much longer." I hadn't seen a drop of rain in the 2 weeks of my stay so far. I expected the thunder that I heard soon after. The air had been charged with that certain kind of electricity for a few hours by then. If you have ever experienced a thunderstorm in summer, I think you know what I mean. I had brushed my teeth and was now standing at my bedroom window. A cool breeze was moving my curtains. Just as I was turning towards my bed, I felt as if I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Lightning. But not simply that. The lightning was carving out the shape of something in the sky. It was just a split second, but I was sure. Now wide awake, I pulled a chair next to the window, sat down and waited. I tried not to blink. The next lightning came. I could make out a gigantic shape. It moved. It moved within the dark clouds that drew thicker by the minute. Every lighting was like a snapshot of this silhouette. I will try to describe it as best as I can. Even though the incident happened 30 years ago, these images will forever be burned into the trenches of my brain. It must have been 100 meters big, give or take. It sounds crazy, I know, but the thing was there, up in the sky. The lightning became more frequent. Its limbs moved in different directions. There were many. I first thought they were arms, but it could also have been something tentacle-like. The rain had started to come down by then. Some of its limbs were reaching downwards, breaking through the barrier of clouds. It looked like they were searching for something. I was startled, previously trying my best not to blink. I was now more than afraid to do so. Slowly, I realized that the clouds were moving towards the house. It felt like minutes before I finally managed to move. I grabbed the curtains and drew them shut. While I did so, I caught one last glimpse of it, or better, of one of its limbs. It quickly moved over the field, the road. Searching, it got caught on a telephone pole. In one quick motion, it wrapped around the pole and ripped it out of the ground. That was it. I pressed my eyes shut and practically fell to the floor. Hunched up in fetal position, I lay there for a long time. An hour passed, maybe even 2, before I felt like the growling of the thunder became less frequent. The sound of the heavy rain had turned softer. I managed to crawl into my bed, hid under the covers, and eventually fell asleep. The next day had started quietly. There was nothing to be heard outside. My body hurt as I got up, because of the tension my muscles had been in all night, I think. I peeked out between the curtains. Fields, still a bit wet. In some spaces, the ground looked as if something big had plowed over it. About 50 meters away, the telephone pole lay on the ground. As I entered the kitchen, my grandfather greeted me. "What a storm. I think there are some fences that need to be repaired. Can you do that later?" I stayed for the rest of the summer. It was de-rent now. We talked less. In September, I decided to go back to the city, even though my grandparents were sad to see me go. In 1998, they both died. My mother sold the house. I can't let go of the memories of this night. As I said, it feels like it is burned into my brain. I still wonder what I saw. Maybe there is a rational explanation. A gas leak causing hallucinations or something. I really don't know. Thank you so much for reading. Maybe this story reaches someone who has experienced something similar. Have a good night. An Untold Dream. I have no idea where to start. I'm sorry in advance if I ramble a few times while writing this. I'm no writer, so I may even repeat myself a few times. I'll do my best to be as descriptive as possible when writing this. Let me preset this dream. I chose to finally share this dream for a few reasons. Lately, I have been listening to Creepcast and seen that they mainly read stories from here. Now please don't think I'm writing this because I want them to pull my dream. No. Would it be cool? Duh. But the truth is, I just want answers. This seemed to be the best place to write this dream. Maybe someone out there may have had a similar dream, or someone who can interpret dreams and explain what the hell I dreamt about. And lastly, because I think I'm about ready to talk about it, I've held on to it for so long and had no one to talk to about it. Now we can set the events of the dream. The year was 2011, slightly fresh out of high school. During this time, no major events happened. I lived with my parents. My brother moved out to live with his girlfriend, and I was in my first serious relationship. I wasn't really into much, except video games and YouTube. During that time, I was heavily into conspiracy stuff. The aliens, pyramids, lizard people, that sort of stuff. Gonna ramble already, so I'm currently in my 30s. I hate that I remember this dream. Not a single piece of this dream is forgotten. I can't recall things that happened last year, or even a dream I had 2 nights ago, but this one, it's stuck, practically tattooed on my brain. Anyways, it was an early afternoon during the summertime. I was playing my Xbox in my parents' basement, probably playing Halo or something, and before I knew it, I was getting tired. As I stated before, I'm no writer, so I really hope how I word this out so you can envision the layout of my basement. It's nothing spectacular, a basement, but it's crucial when we get to the dream. This is a typical North Philly twin home, so the basement is just one long rectangle going down. One end of the basement was the laundry room and the other end had a door that led to our backyard. With that said door, there was a doorknob on the right side of the door that you would pull and it would open towards you, about a foot away from you or about 4 steps leading up until you were faced with another door with a doorknob on the left that you would also pull towards you to open. Once that door is open, you are presented with a final door. A lot of doors, I know, and with this last one, the doorknob was to your left, which you would push to open the door. I know. Why the hell are we talking about the doors? It's not a game changer in this dream, but, well, I'll get to it. Once outside, it's pretty open, and to the right is a metal-linked fence that divides our yard from the neighbors. The fence was maybe 6.5 feet high, so again, a normal rectangle like that. There are no other doors that lead anywhere else in that basement, just that one that leads outside and of course the door up the steps that brings you to the first floor of the house. Those are the real details of my parents' home. So back to where I was tired. I decided to take a nap on the couch I was sitting on. I laid down on my back, closed my eyes, and just like that I was asleep, a deep one. Christ, the way I feel heavy right now, preparing to write about this damn dream. I woke up, sat at the edge of my couch, and stood up. Things felt foggy, vision blurry, one of those how long have I been sleeping for kind of moments. I turned around, looked down, and in complete shock I saw myself. I was still sleeping, I saw my body. Nothing different, no clothes changed, no different colors. It was me. Not sure what the hell was happening. I began to pace a few steps back and forth, trying to rationalize what was going on. I'm in full control. I touched my chest and I felt it. I touched my own sleeping body's chest and I could also feel that. I was in control. Nothing was different around me. Everything was exactly as it was. I decided to walk toward the door that led outside. The first door opened as normal as it did. Walked up to the second door and opened it, but I could only open it maybe halfway. Once it reached halfway, the third door would slam shut. Confused, I decided to close the second door. Maybe something was wrong with the hinges. But I noticed as I closed the second door, the third door would open. I kept repeating this over and over again, trying to figure out how I could make it outside. Eventually, I just decided to squeeze through the second door while it was halfway open. I remember physically feeling my chest and back scrape between the door and the wall, and when I managed to squeeze through the door, closed behind me, leaving the third door wide open. I was outside, and it was dark. The only lights I had were those motion-activated lights I had in the backyard and the neighbors. I looked around my backyard, actually asking the question, how long was I asleep for, until remembered that my physical body was still sleeping. So am I even awake? Everything was normal outside other than it being dark, until I looked through the chain link fence into my neighbor's backyard. Something was there in the middle of where their light was pointing. It was so strange. Even though the light was shining on it, it was still black, as if it wasn't illuminated at all. At first, it was small. I honestly thought it was a puppy. I took a slow step forward and it began to shake and shift. At the start, it looked like it was boiling, and then things started to snap its limbs, as it just kept getting bigger and bigger. I had no idea what to do. I was scared. Once it took an inch forward, I darted towards the door. The worry of how the door worked didn't bother me. I blasted through that goddamn door, closed and locked the second and first doors. I felt my heart racing and my body sweating. I began to pace again, having not a single clue what was going on. I leaned over to my body, grabbed myself by my shoulders, and began to shake vigorously. Wake up, wake up, wake up. But nothing. I felt trapped. I began to pace, again until I realized another change. I noticed that the wall to my right had this new corner part to it. I walked over past it and saw a door there facing the same direction as the door that led outside. I was hesitant at first, but curiosity got the best of me. I opened the door and again, it led outside, sorta. I decided to look to my left first. There was a wooden railing that trailed straight, maybe about 4 feet high, and it stretched for what looked like miles. I couldn't see an end to it. Above the wooden rail were green bushes that stood higher than the wood railing, maybe 2 feet above the railing. There was a space between the ceiling of this walkway and the bushes. It was the sky. It was bright blue. It was daytime. I put my head down. What is going on? I slowly lifted my head up and looked to my right, and a huge chill came crashing down into my spine. I wanted to throw up. There, 3 bodies were hanging on the wall. They looked like they were hanging by a hook that was caught by the nape of their neck. Their heads stared down with lifeless eyes. I couldn't make it out, but I believe there were 2 men and 1 woman. I did not want to inspect them. Even if a part of me wanted to, I was frozen. But yet I couldn't look away. I was fixed on their heads, until all 3 simultaneously turned their heads slowly and met my eyes. As soon as they locked into my eyes, that connection was immediately severed. I turned around and shut the door behind me. Now I'm frantic. Now I'm terrified. I go back to my body and shake it again and again. Please come on. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. Nothing. I felt so helpless. I'm dead. This is purgatory. I remembered my mom was home and she sure as hell wasn't taking a nap. I thought maybe, just maybe I could somehow interact with her. I was ready to do anything to get out of whatever hell dream I was in. Given everything I had seen so far, I decided to go upstairs, preparing myself to see what else changed. I walk into my dining room and things are normal, no changes. I turned to the doorway of the living room and saw my mom, sitting on the couch with a phone to her ear, and again everything was normal in that moment. I ran over to my mom telling her everything that was going on, but nothing, only her laughing. Mom, yo mom, why aren't you listening to me? At first her gaze was fixed forward as if she was looking through me. Then her eyes snapped to mine. She saw me, she was laughing louder. She was laughing at me. I took a few steps back, again cursed by paralyzing fear. The laughing went on and on and on. I was finally able to move a little and began to walk past her, my eyes still looking at her, but she stayed facing the same direction, laughing. I began to pace again. Come on, Leo. Think. I'm asleep. I know I am. This is just some messed up dream, man. Come on, I know I can get out of this. Something. And I remembered one thing. Something I believe we have all experienced before. The falling dream. When I was a kid, this is maybe the only other dream other than the waterfall one. We all know that one, that I can remember. I grew up in this home, so I always had a dream where I would fall from the top of the steps, and as soon as I hit the floor, boom, I woke up. It was never a pleasant wake up, but I woke up nonetheless. So that's what I did. I ran upstairs to the 2nd floor, looked down the stairs, breathed in, and froze. I felt everything. My chest, my sleeping body's chest, the scraping of my chest and back when I squeezed through the basement door to go outside. I could feel it. What if I hurt myself? After asking myself that, I quickly realized, would I rather risk hurting myself or stay in this state for God knows how long? So I jumped, straight down, not hitting a single step. My body crashed to the floor. My eyes were shut. All I saw was darkness. I opened my eyes confident that I woke up, but there I was, laying on my belly flat on the floor, the laughter louder. I slowly began to get up. I felt out of breath, and tears started to fill my eyes. No. That was supposed to work. It's the only thing that could work. I ran upstairs, fell again, and again, and again, as the laughter kept growing. Every fall didn't hurt, but I remember feeling so uncomfortable when I landed. Hell, I remember one fall, my legs damn near went over my head. It's called the scorpion or something. I did one more fall. Nothing. I pushed myself up, sitting on the floor exhausted, and crying my eyes out, hopeless. I stood up and began yelling and pleading. Leo, please. Wake up. I'm begging you, wake up. I began jumping and stomping, damn near shaking the entire house, over and over again. Then I felt something. I felt my shoulder move, not the shoulder I could reach over to touch, but the shoulder of my body that was sleeping in the basement. I continued, screaming at the top of my lungs. I swallowed just now while writing this because I remembered that feeling of my throat being torn to shreds from screaming. Even my head hurts right now. The pressure is weird. Did I say I hate thinking about this dream? If I didn't, well, I'm telling you now. As I continued to scream and cry, my shoulder moved little by little till I was able to feel a full sway. And once that full sway happened, everything rushed into me all at once. I rose from the couch, drenched in sweat, tears in my eyes, out of breath. I was back in my body. I double-checked, triple-checked. I checked to make sure way too many times. I ran over to the wall that had an extra door. There was no door. I ran to the door that led outside. The multitude of doors opened like they regularly did. I went outside. The sun was setting. It was probably around 6 or 7 p.m. Looked at my neighbor's yard, and nothing, but still ran back inside, not wanting to take any chances of something happening. I went upstairs, but no one was home. It was just me. I called my girlfriend at the time to see if things were normal. She answered, "This is an additional part I don't like, but I'd rather be honest." I was so mad at her. She normally calls me like every hour or two every day, and of all days she didn't call me once after I took that nap. It wasn't her fault. She had nothing to do with it, but I was angry. "You didn't call me one time?" I said. "What do you mean?" "I was busy. What happened?" She responded. "I had the worst dream of my life that could bet and ended shortly if you had called." "Well, how was I sup—" Her voice was cut short. I ended the phone call abruptly. I know. Dick move. Again. I'm not proud I did that, and what happened had nothing to do with her. I'm sorry. So for the next 0.13 years this dream has stuck with me. Never shared and is very real. I really wish it wasn't. This isn't some, haha, spooked ya. This is just something that's been with me. I never knew how to go about sharing it. Do I tell it to the boys over a couple of drinks? Do you tell my wife about this? I sure as shit am not gonna tell my kids about it. But maybe this could be its new home. Do I feel lighter? Not really. My head is pounding like I said before. Every time I think about this dream, it feels made up. But believe me when I tell you, I wish it was. You might have wondered why I never called it a nightmare. I can't tell you why, other than it just didn't have that nightmare feel to me. Nightmare feels short, or it's some cheesy chase. I don't know what the hell to call what I experienced. I know some people are gonna say I went through some intense sleep paralysis, and maybe it was. As haunting as this dream was, you'd think it couldn't get any worse. It did. A few days after this all happened, I left work slightly early, walked into my parents' house, and laid on the living room couch on my side, and unknowingly drifted asleep. I woke up. While my consciousness woke up, I could sort of see from the little space between my slightly closed eyelids. I was scared. I couldn't move. I heard something breathing, and it got closer and closer until I felt, whatever it was, brush my ear, and in a quiet, raspy whisper it said, "You will never find me." I jolted up, looked around, and there was nothing. I've never taken a nap since. An air raid siren is blaring from my town's World War II bunker, but there isn't a siren down there. An air raid siren is blaring from my town's World War II bunker, but there isn't a siren down there. What are we hearing? The town's only air raid siren was decommissioned after decades of disuse in the late 90s. For that matter, the siren had always been mounted on a steel pole out in an open field so as to be heard by all residents in the area. There was never a siren within the abandoned air raid shelter at the edge of town. But an unmistakable wartime wail has been thundering through our streets for the past hour. It's midnight now, and I still hear the drone of that motorized cylinder. It yowls and warbles, sliding in a glissando from high to low to high to low again. We all know what we're hearing, even those of us born decades after the end of the war. We know that nightmarish sound from grainy footage and documentaries. Hearing it in the flesh is more haunting than words can explain. A councilman named Martin posted on the town's Facebook page to say that he'd traced the racket to the old air raid shelter at the edge of town, a bunker abandoned midway through the war and left standing as a memorial, of sorts, to the soldiers of that era. Anyhow, some townsfolk have agreed to join Martin in investigating the sound and hopefully putting a stop to it. I'll be joining them in a mo, but I wanted to post about this before leaving the house, as I'm hoping that a Redditor might have an explanation. Most folk are calling it an awfully insensitive practical joke, saying that we'll get down there to find a cluster of portable speakers perhaps, looping a recording of the infamous air raid siren. My gut says something else. Truth be told, I don't much fancy joining Martine's search party, considering what they say happened down there in the 40s. Update #1. Just been on our first trip down there, and we found nothing yet other than a spook that sent one of the lads packing, so I've accompanied him back to the surface, and I thought I'd edit my post a little to offer an update. When we all gathered in that overgrown field at the town's outskirts, with torches lighting the rusted, weed-coated bunker door ahead, that was when the dread truly set into my bones. They were standing ajar. I ought to get home, I fibbed, scratching my nape uncomfortably. That did nothing to lower the hairs on the back of my neck. Mary was struggling with the dogs as I left. They won't stop howling. You know what else won't stop howling, Lenny? Asked Martin. Then he jammed a finger at the browning metal entrance ahead, mostly reclaimed by nature. That infernal siren. We need to find it and shut it up. I don't like this, Mrs. Lutherton said, shuffling anxiously from toe to toe. My father closed up the shelter in the 50s. Who opened it? Same kids playing this prank, huffed Mr. Lutherton. Are we doing this, Martin? The councilman nodded and motioned for us to follow. As we followed the middle-aged man to the bunker entrance, Harry, the youngest of the bunch, placed a hand on Mrs. Lutherton's shoulder. I'm happy to wait with you by the cars if you don't want to go inside. Mr. Lutherton rolled his eyes and grumbled, but Mrs. Lutherton smiled. That's awfully kind of you, Harry, but I'm fine. I'm not that old and decrepit just yet. No, I didn't think you were, answered Harry. I just thought you might be... Scared, I finished. Inwardly, you thought she might be scared, just like the rest of us. As we sidled through the bunker door, each of us seeming hesitant to edge closer to whoever might be down there, the blare of the siren loosened. I suppose it had to be deafening to carry so effectively out of such a slim opening into the town at large. Steps of galvanized steel led down into a brickwork dungeon of sorts. Formerly red bricks turned mostly gray. They were coated with damp and mold, and things that wriggled, perhaps retreated from the light, having become accustomed to the dark after generations in that mass graveyard. Apparently, hundreds of townsfolk perished down there. The bodies were cleaned up by the scraps of surviving residents. Then the bunker was, following the end of the war, sealed away. In the field, there's a plaque commemorating the lost souls by name. Anyhow, we followed a long tunnel, 15 meters in breadth and untold meters in depth, past a neat, endless row of bunk beds. Then Harry got spooked, said he saw a shadow move past one of the beds. I didn't hear anything, but I agreed to take the poor lad back to the surface. He said he's going to wait for us just outside the entrance, so as to catch those kids if they resurface. I'm going back down to help the others. I'll provide another update once I come up. Update #2. Jesus. If anybody has figured out the location of this air raid shelter, do not share it and do not come here. I went back down, phone torch leading the way. I was hoping to catch up to Martin and the Luthertons, but the trio seemed to have gone quite far ahead. I called for them, but my yells were swallowed by the bray of that blasted, deafening siren. After walking perhaps 100 meters or so, I made it to the end of the tunnel, a bunking area large enough to sleep every single wartime resident of my modestly sized town, I would imagine. An archway opened onto a perpendicular passage, so I entered it, turned left, then took a second left into a tunnel parallel to the first, which served as the dining hall. As I shouted names into the room of grubby, decaying picnic-style benches, there came a deafening cry of pain, loud enough to penetrate the wall of sound built by the eternal air raid siren. It came from the counter at the far side of the room, another 100 meters away, so I stopped yelling and ran towards it. And as I neared the counter, a frail hand reached up from the other side. A hand stained with blood. Then came that sharp, paralyzing fear which near immobilizes the body. What the fuck was I seeing? I didn't wait for an answer. I lifted myself over the former serving counter, dropped to the other side, and spun to look at the shelving underneath. I don't know whether I screamed or fell flat on my rear first. It was Mr. and Mrs. Lutherton. 2 sardines of flesh and bone were crammed under there, faces fully gouged out, brains and bones and all, as if their faces had been scooped out and rendered bloody skeletal bowls. Most impossibly of all, Mr. Lutherton's hand was still moving. That old man who should have been dead was raising his arm and outstretching those fingers pleadingly, as if hoping someone could untangle him and his wife from their mashed, contorted heap beneath the counter. Nobody could save them. They were dead. Had to be dead. I slid away in fear, legs jellied and useless whilst I screamed and wiped away the snot and tears from my face. I don't know how long it took my flight response to kick into action, but I eventually stumbled to my feet, jumped back over the counter, and dashed back through the deserted cafeteria. As I ran back the way I came, the siren grew louder, but I ignored that. I scurried through the passageway, then into the first tunnel. The row of beds stood beside me, and the bunker entrance stood in the distance, up a small staircase. My hope of escape. But I wasn't alone in that tunnel. There was Martin, the last surviving member of the search party, standing 50 or so meters ahead of me. It took me a second to realize that he was an obstacle. That realization hit a moment after the dread, the nightmarish feeling in my gut that the man ahead wasn't the man who'd come down with me. "Martin?" I meekly asked. And the man did not turn slowly. He snapped his body around in response to my voice. When he did, I screamed again. The councilman's skull had been gouged, much like the skulls of the Lothertons, to leave little more than the back and sides of his head. Flaps of skin surrounded that crater within his face, and whirred in a breeze, a stream of air generated by the air raid siren, which was, I realized, coming deep from within the man's body. Martin's hands clawed at his face, as if trying to find something, and when he found only a hole spewing out that wartime wail, he started to dart forwardly, feet zigzagging haphazardly. He was barreling towards me. I clasped my lips to prevent another scream, another sound that might draw that terrifying thing towards me, even if he were still Martin, a somewhat human man in a state of panic. I squeezed between two bunk beds, murmuring fearfully as the stumbling, faceless man closed the gap between us. Then I slipped into a narrow gap between the bunk beds and the wall, only 2 meters wide, but it seemed odd to not have the beds pressed up against the wall. There, hiding in the dark, I heard something else. Something breathing in the blackness. A breath so small, so close, and so intimate, so loud, though it was only a whisper, it managed to be heard atop the roar of Martin's air raid siren. Only it wasn't a human breath. It felt to me like the low hum of air from something mechanical, more of a klaxon than an air raid siren, yet somehow far more alive than even Martin, breathing his siren through fleshy filters. I flashed my light to my right towards the sound of the breathy klaxon, and it stopped. Stopped as the torch glow met the forgotten rags of some corpse. A man forgotten at the bottom of that bunker, which seemed surprising given the significance of his garbs. A black domed helmet of dented steel plastered with a large white what. This was the air raid warden. Another impossibility, to my eyes, was that the man's skeletal remains hadn't decomposed, hadn't turned to ash, and that revealed the ghastliness of his death. His skull had been much like the skulls of Martin and the Lothertons, caved inwards. Then wind whistled up through what would once been the esophagus, spilling out of the cavity to produce the faint, resurrecting breeze of that klaxon sound I had heard. I didn't want to give it a chance. Powered onwards purely by adrenaline, as my mind hadn't the time to collapse into pure existential dread, I scooped up the bones and warden attire, coughing at the ash and dust, but pushing onwards. I decided that perhaps giving the man a proper burial would bring an end to that supernatural hell. My mother was a Christian, and she believed in restless spirits, believed that all people deserved to rest once their time had come. After the night I've had, I don't know what I believe. I followed the hidden passage behind the heads of the bunk beds towards the beginning of the tunnel, then I scooted out and tiptoed up the staircase, skeletal remains in my clutches. The door's already narrow opening had slimmed down. I wasn't going to fit through it. Panic resurfacing, I heard Harry saying that a gust had swung the door closed, torch still in my hand, poking out between the air raid warden's corpse. I could see the glint of the handyman working hard to pry the door apart from the wall. "Are you going to help?" he grunted, managing only to inch the door very slowly open. "Or do you want to stay stuck in there?" I looked down at the corpse in my hands, trying to think of a response, when the air raid siren suddenly cut out. I could hear only a persistent ringing in my ears, some muffled words from Harry, then the dull thuds of boots against the floor of the shelter below. I turned to see Martin. That faceless horror extended its arms, extending outwards, and I begged the councilman through blubbers to recognize me, to not hurt me. And then I saw it for myself, saw whatever Harry saw. A shadowy mass, black save for the flicker of colors and shapes, the outline of a white, much like the one on the warden's helmet below me. The black mass swooped across the way and looped its near-formless shape under Martin's arms, before yanking him away down the tunnel and far from me. The air raid siren started again, and I knew in that moment that it was the sound of the councilman screaming. I was pulled out of that trance by the sound of Harry yelling, metal groaning and the outside wind wailing. I twisted to see that the bunker door stood wide open, and Harry lay on the grass, staring at me, and the corpse, and the inexplicably open door in bewilderment. I took my opportunity to flee, carrying the body with me, and then the two of us gasped as the skeleton turned to ash the moment I crossed the threshold, leaving me carrying only an old, dusty air raid warden's uniform in my arms. Then the bunker door slammed shut behind us, and the siren, the cry of Martin, died behind it. I left the uniform in that field. Harry and I drove home, and I've been standing in my bedroom for hours, typing and retyping this update, looking out at that field, 2 streets over, the bunker that lurks in the dark, watching and waiting, as it has done for 80 years. What lives down there? I made a deal with a pleasure demon. It was the worst decision I've ever made. My pinky finger tasted like stroopwafel covered in maple syrup. That was the first piece of me that they took, that I had given up, without any fanfare and without any need. If I'm completely honest, so stupid of me. Put the tip of your pinky finger in your mouth, they had said, without speaking. Have a taste. It's the greatest feeling in the world. And they were right. The tip of my finger broke off, crisp and clean like a delicate cookie wafer. I felt no pain, only a subtly sweet and sticky syrup combined with a satisfying crunchy texture. My pinky was the best snack I've ever had, and ever will. Afterwards, the hint of maple just a whisper on the back of my tongue. I stared at my hand, at the tiny missing space where earlier there was flesh and nail. Now only a healed nub remained. I marveled at the newborn pink of the skin, flawlessly and invisibly stitched back together. I savored the taste of my finger, and felt sadness and longing towards its fading memory. I really should have been more alarmed, but truthfully, I didn't mourn the fingertip itself. Tell people you lost it, chopping onions, they winked, without winking. Their form defied description, and maybe comprehension. A vaguely human shape, with kaleidoscopic skin, and features that danced in the corners of my vision, and ran when my eye settled on them. Staring directly at them too long induced nausea, as if I had just swallowed a cup of sugar, but within the shifting landscape that they wore, I spied glimpses of both horror and ecstasy. I couldn't help but shudder. I was repulsed, and yet I wanted more. When I think back to that first meeting now, I feel so dumb. It wasn't like I was starving at the time. I wasn't even hungry for a snack. I was simply bored. And the next thing I knew, there it was, in the corner of my living room, an ominous haze next to the TV I had been staring at. A pleasure demon, a connoisseur of all creation. At this line I sensed it give an exaggerated bowing flourish. A smirking grin lay behind its ever-shifting mass. I've collected so many wonders of this world. Give me a taste of yours, and I'll share mine. A fair trade. No, they laughed. A sound like tinkling wind chimes overlaid on an infant's scream. Think on it. The next thing they took from me was the color purple, which again really didn't seem so bad. Purple's not really that popular of a color, is it? Now whenever I stare at the eggplant emoji, I just see nothing, or rather, the color nothing. Not gray, not black, but a pure emptiness, in the rough form of a suggestive vegetable. It's like there's a small, purple-shaped void in my mind. It had been yet another Friday evening that I was about to spend by myself on the couch. I had few friends and zero plans, but that was something familiar to me. The small studio apartment I called home felt like both a cage and a cave, something that kept me in, but also provided comfort and shelter and safety from the outside. It was when I was debating between Netflix or YouTube that the pleasure demon returned. In return for the color purple, they told me a story, but not just any story, the greatest story ever told. I remember a soft, golden hum, slowly filling my mind. I remember tones that sang sweeter than any music I've ever heard. I remember joy, terror, shock, and wonder. I remember gasping at the plot twists, crying at the deaths, cheering out loud at the triumphant climax, and crying again at the satisfying resolution. Afterwards, when I stared at my phone and realized that I had been listening to the story for 7 hours, when I raced to my computer to write it down, I realized that I remembered none of the details. Nothing but a lingering memory of that experience, pleasant with a hint of the grotesque, something I grasped desperately for but remained just out of reach. Don't you worry, the demon cooed. I'll be back. Next, I lost the ability to dream. The pleasure demon had returned on another Friday, but this one capped a particularly rough week at work. One of those weeks where nothing went well and everything felt harder than it should have. When I saw the pleasure demon out of the corner of my eye in the kitchen, I felt excitement and relief. As stupid as it sounds, I almost wanted to embrace the demon like a friend. "Tough week?" they asked, with a very good approximation of sympathy. "Give me a good one," I replied. "Good one coming right up." The demon's vague form had been a few feet away on the other side of the kitchen, but the next thing I knew it stood in front of me, filling my vision with that unsettling, writhing mass. I felt a chill run through my spine and a brief moment of fear, but the demon reached out, touched, then pushed past my skin, and the chill was replaced by a slow rolling thunder that began in my toes, picking up heat and momentum as it traveled up my body before erupting in bliss when it reached my throat. I opened my mouth, maybe to scream, maybe to gasp, but instead my mind shattered into a million pieces of pleasure. When I returned to my body, it was Saturday morning, but it took a few days before I discovered that I could no longer dream, days that I mostly spent trying desperately to cling to the fading memories of the euphoria I experienced that night. When I realized what had happened, what I had given up this time, I was struck by not only horror but also, for the first time, regret. I liked my dreams. I liked the ability to escape in my mind, to tell myself stories. This time I did mourn my loss. I decided that I needed to arm myself with knowledge. First I tried Googling pleasure demon, but I only found resources for painting miniatures or references to video games. And my demon is very real. Next I tried ChatGPT, which of course was even worse. Then the local public library, where pleasure and demon together, gave me a real grab bag of options, but all fiction. Finally I decided to search the dusty independent bookstore a few blocks over. Crossing its doorway was like stepping over a threshold into another world. From a busy urban street into a musky memory from centuries past. The space was small like most downtown businesses, but books, most of which looked like they had seen better days, cluttered every visible surface. No other customer was inside, just the storekeeper quietly reading behind a giant scarred mahogany table that served as the checkout counter. She didn't look up when I entered. I picked an aisle under the non-fiction sign that was barely hanging onto the ceiling and dove in. After an hour of fruitless searching, I returned to the woman at the checkout table. "Hi, excuse me," I nervously asked, then cleared my throat. "Do you carry anything about, pleasure demons?" She had looked up when I first spoke, but at the last part a different expression subtly took over. She searched my face while I held her gaze, hoping that the creases she wore, the complete opposite of my youth, was evidence of wisdom and experience that she may gift onto me. After a moment that stretched just slightly too long, she slowly shook her head. "I can't help you with pleasure demons." She rolled the words out slowly, as if recalling something ancient from her past. "No one can. You must help yourself." "I'm sorry." I was a little taken aback. This was a strange response to me asking about books, after all. But as I turned to leave, she suddenly reached out and imprisoned my hand in a tight, leathery grip. She showed surprising strength for a person of her age. I could feel her middle finger sharply squeezing the nub of my pinky, as if she's decided to pour all the energy available to her into this moment. "The people who have asked this question." She stared directly at me with an intensity that was unnerving, her bird-like frame slightly trembling now behind the desk. "All their lives become worse. All of them. Without fail. The only difference is how fast they fall." She squinted at me for a second longer, then released me, and the intensity and energy faded as quick as it came. "Sorry I can't help. Have a nice day." I left the store with a stomach churning like a stormy sea. The encounter at the bookstore unsettled me, and I resolved to make no further trades with the demon. That resolve lasted for 3 months. It was the start of yet another weekend to myself, when the pleasure demon returned. I don't really know why they showed up when they did. Things in my life were fine. Maybe this time they were the one that was bored. "I've been thinking of you, dreaming of you, you might say." They laughed, setting my eardrums aflame. I wanted to speak up to tell the demon to leave, but I surprised myself by realizing that their appearance felt like a pleasant surprise. Joyful memories of what I'd experienced in the past, faded as they were, returned to the center of my mind. And yet again I found myself trading a part of myself away. Like before, a night passed without me realizing it. When I returned to my apartment, I found a chunk of my arm missing. Where there was once flesh, now there's a crater in the shape of a near-perfect rectangle, 2 inches on the long side, right above the crook of my elbow. The indent was covered with thin pink skin that buzzed with a faint stinging sensation. I could see the paleness of bone just beneath the floor of the unnatural boxy depression. I screamed, after hyperventilating for a few minutes, then passing an empty prayer of thanks for my concrete walls. I turned my attention back to my arm, the disfiguration no less awful than moments before. It was like my arm was dough, and someone removed a piece with a cookie cutter. I felt vomit creeping up my throat. To this day, I stick to long sleeves. I wish I could say that was the end of my exchanges with the demon. It should have been, but I made one final trade. In this last encounter, the experience of euphoria was tainted with the knowledge of my sin and fear of what I'd lose next. The answer, as it turns out, was 3 weeks of my life. When I finally left that realm of bliss and returned to the world, I found myself lying in an unknown alleyway. I felt dampness under and around me, including on what I quickly realized was the dumpster I was leaning against. A morose, inky sky with a faint orange glow on the edges told me that it was night in the city. As my eyes adjusted to the dimness, I was hit with a heavy stench. Where I was, how I got here, and how to get home. I soon realized these were the least of my worries as, horrified, I examined my body. Within the tattered rips of my shirt, I could see still healing scratches and bizarre spherical punctures, like stabbings from a Bic pen, and covering it all, covering me, from head to toe, was a heavy, thorough cake of blood and shit. I was the stench. Thankfully, I still had my phone, though I dropped and cracked it on the grimy alley ground when I saw the date. The worst part wasn't the shame I felt snaking my way through the city in that state until I finally reached my apartment. That I remained in the same city after all that time was another small mercy that I'm grateful for. The worst part also wasn't the work of building the fractured fragments of my life back together. My job was gone, the few friends I had barely hanging on, and I never did escape the suspicion and shady remarks from the landlord after being late on rent for 2 weeks. The absolute worst part are the shards of recollection that impact without warning and explode my soul like a streaking hot comet from the dark recesses of my memory. I can be buying groceries, catching up with a friend over coffee, or lying in bed at night when I'm struck down by a flash from what I know to be some moment within those 3 weeks. A twisted grin, a howl escaping my throat, a flash of blue fabric that I had ripped off another moments before, a coldness from metal on my bare thigh. When these moments strike, I'm paralyzed by disgust and self-loathing. A few times I've let loose a cry of anguish. Once I broke into tears. An unscarred mind, the chunk of my arm, and of course the tip of my pinky. Those are some of the things I traded to the pleasure demon, and that I'll never get back, for there is no way to beat them, no way of winning, and no escape. The demon remains an occasional presence in the corners of my vision. Even now, as I'm writing these words, I can see that amorphous, glittering, evil shape in the corner of my living room, offering their sweet and empty promises. I sense that my story even has its tacit consent. Perhaps they see it as publicity, a promotional pamphlet, but don't be fooled. You know now, a deal with a pleasure demon is a deal you can break. How long my current strength will last, I don't know. What I do know is that, for the rest of my life, the pleasure demon will remain in the shadows of my eye, and in my moments of frailty, I can count on them whispering their words of false wonders against the barriers of my mind. Whenever you need me, I'll always be here for you. I lived in an old Soviet apartment building for a few months. It kind of grew on me. I knew I was going to hate it the moment I walked through that door. The cramped entrance hall was already thick with the musty smell of old carpet. I kicked off my boots and stepped into the living room-bedroom hybrid, soaking in the depression that seemed to emanate from every corner. The ancient Soviet-style furniture looked like it belonged in a museum, as if just breathing near it for too long would cause it to crumble into dust. The wallpaper was likely intended to be beige. Maybe it even was at some point, but now it had this burnt orange tint to it, like the inside of a microwave that hadn't been cleaned in ages. A pair of floral curtains draped over the singular large window tried their best to inject some life into the room. Unfortunately, the only thing they succeeded at was making everything else look even duller by contrast. Alexei didn't have to ask me for my opinion. My expression probably spoke for itself. He reiterated that this was just short-term, a month or two at most, and we would be moving to his actual place in Moscow as soon as the renovations were done. That's where I thought would be living when I agreed to move to Russia with him, but then his apartment got flooded just a day before I was scheduled to arrive. Talk about rotten luck. He did everything he could to find us a place under the circumstances, so I wasn't upset with him, but I wasn't exactly jumping for joy either. Our temporary abode apparently used to belong to his best friend's grandma. You could really tell. It was located in what's called a Khrushchevka, which from what I understand is basically the old school version of the stereotypical commie block. Considering those are already viewed as outdated, you can only imagine what living in its predecessor is like. I guess if you grew up in one, it might not seem so bad, but going from a Canadian suburb to a concrete box in the middle of whatever the Eastern European equivalent of a ghetto is was quite the whiplash. Hey, we've got to make the best of the hand we're dealt, right? I told my boyfriend with what I hoped was a comforting grin. As much as I hated it, and I really fucking hated it, I didn't want him to feel guilty over something he couldn't have possibly anticipated. Just a small bump in the road, I kept telling myself. Soon everything would be back on track. The first few days were uneventful, almost business as usual. Alexei would leave early in the morning to catch the train to Moscow for work, while I settled into my regular routines. I often became so engrossed in my projects that my surroundings faded into the background, at least until I finally put the laptop down and wanted to grab something from the fridge, only to be reminded that, well, we didn't have one. Not a working one anyway. We actually stored our food out on the balcony. It was early January, so it was definitely cold enough for that. The only other option was using the communal fridge, but I wasn't a fan of my cheesecake tasting like onion and pickles. I want to say that the place started to grow on me, but honestly it didn't, even putting aside the lack of basic amenities. There was just something off about it. It was way too quiet. I expected to hear some movement in the hallway, or maybe someone blasting their TV a bit too loud, you know, the usual apartment stuff. But nope, the building was dead silent. To the point where I sometimes wondered if I was the only one living there during the day. I knew for fact I wasn't alone though, because every time, and I do mean every time, I stepped out to the shops or just to stretch my legs, there was always this middle-aged guy standing by the door to the shared basement, just staring at it. He looked a bit rough around the edges, but definitely didn't come off as crazy or on drugs or anything like that. He just seemed exhausted, his dark eyes carrying a vacant look, as if this was some chore he was stuck doing. We'd exchange nods, and then he would go right back to staring at the old metal door with its chipping blue paint. It was odd at first, then started to become creepy, and then went right back to being one of those things that you just don't think too much about. After all, he wasn't hurting anyone, nor was he being weird toward me. Who was I to question a man's passion for door watching? I didn't bring him up to Alexei. He can be a bit too overprotective sometimes. I didn't want him starting any drama with the neighbors on my behalf, especially since we weren't going to be staying there for long anyway. I'm not sure if he noticed the strange man whenever he'd come home in the evenings. If he did, he never mentioned it. After about 2 weeks of the same old routine, something changed. I threw on my coat, wrapped myself in a scarf, and headed out to do some shopping as usual. But as I was going down the stairs, I noticed that the man was now on the second floor, staring intently at some other resident's door. He nodded at me like he always did, but this time I didn't nod back. All of a sudden, in this new context, his favorite pastime seemed a lot more concerning. I have no idea what made me decide to confront him on my own, maybe because he looked like an especially scrawny guy, and I figured I could handle him in a struggle if it came to that. My Russian isn't perfect, but I managed to ask him what he was up to. He responded rather matter-of-factly with something along the lines of, "Watching the garden grow." I blinked. I'm not sure what kind of answer I expected. However, it sure as hell wasn't that. I decided to just back off and ask Alexei what the man could have possibly meant when he came home later. Maybe it was some local expression that only made sense if you're a native speaker. But then, true to form, bad luck struck once again. Alexei called me that same afternoon to let me know his sister had been in a car wreck and they were currently at the hospital. He said she was stable, but he wasn't sure when he'd be able to make it back. Naturally, I put on my best sympathetic girlfriend voice, assuring him I could manage on my own for a few days. Inside though, I was panicking over the idea of being stuck there alone. "You sure?" He kept probing. "I could try to get someone to drive over there and..." "Yes, it'll be fine. I'm a big girl. I can take care of myself. You do what you have to do. I'm not going anywhere," I'd insist, desperately hoping that the mask wouldn't slip, or maybe on some level wishing that it would. Being by myself in that claustrophobic hellhole during the day was one thing, but when the sun went down it became a whole different story. The silence, once eerie, now became utterly suffocating. Every little bump had me jolting out of my makeshift blanket fort and racing to switch on the lights, terrified that there was someone at the door trying to pick the lock. It was an irrational fear, but knowing that didn't make it feel any less real at the time. We were on the 5th and top floor, so at least I didn't have to worry about anyone climbing in through the window, although in hindsight, I guess it wasn't technically impossible. Whenever I had to venture out, I made sure to slip past that strange man as quickly as I could. Just his stare alone was enough to make my stomach turn. Worse, after a few days he had moved up a floor and was now lurking around the 3rd. As a result of not getting enough quality sleep, I began having sleep paralysis. If you've never had it before, let me tell you, it fucking sucks. You're lying there wide awake but completely unable to move, and it feels like there's a weight pressing down on your chest. You perceive shapes and figures superimposed upon your familiar surroundings, as if they have crossed the threshold from your nightmares and have followed you over into the real world. One of my most frequent episodes involved these pinkish-red roots slowly creeping up the walls, writhing like giant larvae trying to burrow their way through flesh. They were the worst because, unlike some vague shadow creature, I could clearly see what they were. I could see their flesh-like texture. I could see each disgusting pulse as they squirmed their way along the corners and even up the ceiling, converging directly on top of me. When it was finally over, I would sit up in a cold sweat and just stare at my clammy hands for what felt like hours before the sun would eventually rise. At this point, you might be wondering why I decided to keep my boyfriend in the dark about what was going with me. One reason is that I didn't want him to stress over his spoiled crybaby girlfriend's mini meltdowns when he had enough on his plate already. Truthfully though, I also felt like telling him would somehow make everything I was going through more real somehow, like saying it out loud would give it the acknowledgement it wanted. For both our sakes, I just had to tough it out. The quality of my work obviously took a nosedive. I was missing deadlines, making entry-level mistakes, and my supervisors were starting to get impatient. They were aware of my less than ideal living situation, but at the end of the day, our clients didn't care about any of that. I was forced to take some mandatory time off, which in corporate terms means you're basically on thin ice. This was probably the worst outcome, as it left me with nothing to do but wallow in my own delusions. Day and night started to blur together. I binged every TV show I could think of just so I didn't have to be alone with my thoughts, all the while assuring Alexei that I was doing fine whenever he called to check in on me. Sometimes I wasn't sure if he actually called or if I had just dreamt our conversations. Maybe he had forgotten about me. Maybe he had left me to rot there so my decaying body could serve as compost for whatever those growths were. The roots had made their way to my bed now, crawling out from under it, tugging at my sheets, wrapping around me like a throbbing cocoon. The worst part was that I stopped being scared and just learned to accept it, accept my role as fertilizer, as soil for which their seeds may sprout. The man was now on the 4th floor. I spotted him standing in the front of the apartment directly below ours on my way up one morning. It was then that something in me officially snapped. I can only imagine how deranged I must have looked as I ran up to him, grabbed him by the sweater, and shook his entire bony frame while screaming in his face, demanding to know what the fuck he was really doing. His face remained blank. His thin lips formed a line of cold indifference, or maybe pity. With surprising strength, he pushed me away, adjusted his collar, tucked some imaginary strands of hair behind his bald head, turned around, and went right back to his staring. It was too much. I couldn't do this anymore. I ran upstairs and slammed our apartment door so hard that it rattled the window. In a frenzy, I dug through the mountain of dirty clothes piled on the bed for my phone, intending on calling Alexei to just come and pick me up. But instead of the usual ringing tone, all I heard was the sound of wood snapping and scraping of a giant heart thumping in my ears. I looked down, and what I saw made me drop the phone. The roots were wrapped around my ankles, slowly pulling me down beneath the floorboards. I fought, I screamed, I pleaded, but it was no use. They bound my arms together. They pushed their way through my ears, through my eyes, licking at my brain. The pain was beyond anything I could describe. And then, I woke up in my bed, like I always did. The TV was still running in the background, casting shadows across the littered floor. I caught a glimpse of what I thought was a cockroach scuttling from one greasy microwave food container to another. I pressed my palms to my forehead. I needed fresh air, desperately. I climbed out of bed and dragged my feet over to the balcony. As I pushed aside the curtains, however, I wasn't greeted by the usual view of the street. Roots, throbbing and sinuous, snaked across the outside of my window, squirming as they blotted out every last sliver of daylight. They were pressing against the glass, causing small cracks to form that turned into bigger ones, until they finally came spilling in like a crimson tide, sweeping me up and enveloping me whole. And then I woke up in my bed, or maybe it was the bathroom floor this time. Roots slithered from between cracks in the tiles. and the ceiling was a grotesque tapestry of tumorous growths. What looked like red mushrooms were growing out of the shower drain. I stood up and walked over to the sink. My reflection stared back at me dully. There, inside one eye, a sprout began to unfurl as it tried to push its way through my iris. The pressure inside my skull was too much to bear. I leaned back and smashed my head against the porcelain, again and again, creating an opening for the roots to surge free. They erupted, twisting together into a second head molded from pulsating meat. It smiled at me. Not a sinister smile, but the kind a mother would give her child, letting it know that everything was going to be okay now. And then I woke up in my bed, like I always did. These sort of cycles would play out for what sometimes felt like days at a time. I couldn't really tell the difference between sleep and reality anymore. Maybe there never was a difference. Or maybe, and more likely, I was just going crazy. If that was the case, I figured I might as well get to the bottom of the insanity, both figuratively and literally. The basement door loomed before me, suddenly far more intimidating than the countless times I'd walked past it. Looking up at its tall frame caused a sinking feeling in my gut. I had a piece of metal clutched in my hand, ready to serve as an improvised crowbar if needed. But to my surprise, the door swung open with just the slightest nudge. I don't think it even had a working lock to begin it. I went down the creaking steps and into the darkness. The smell of neglect was more oppressive than ever, along with this sour, vinegary stench that made my nostrils burn. My fingers grazed the wall, brushing away cobwebs as I searched for a light switch. When I finally flicked it on, a solitary bulb flickered to life, casting a harsh spotlight down into the depths of the underground space. It was then that I noticed that the entire floor was alive. A carpet of red mold and winding vegetation stretched deep into the blackness. Those little specks dancing in the air weren't just dust, but tiny little spores, and I immediately became conscious of how much I was inhaling. I quickly covered my nose with my sleeve and pressed on, descending deeper into the gloom. There was practically no surface that didn't have some amount of mold growing on it. And there, propped against a wall, as though at the epicenter of the infestation, was a dead body. I froze, my makeshift tool clanking against the ground as I took in the sight. The figure was hardly recognizable as having been a person. The advanced state of decay hinted that it had been there for quite a bit. The head was slumped to one side, encased in thick mold that seemed to spread outward. While the face was unidentifiable, I recognized the torn sweater as belonging to that strange man. As horrifying of a realization as it might have been under normal circumstances, I also couldn't deny how peaceful he looked, resting there amidst his garden. The silence that I once dreaded now wrapped around me like a cozy blanket. I almost felt the urge to go over and lay beside him. Maybe I did do that, and now I'm just dreaming about writing this from Alexi's car while I wait for him to pack our stuff. He was so surprised when I told him that it actually wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. I could totally see this place becoming our little getaway when life in overcrowded Moscow got too much. I guess it did end up growing on me in a sense. The price of suffering. The road to the cabin was older than I was. A narrow strip of dirt, carved between towering pines, the kind of road that never stayed tame. Every year, Dad would clear the worst of the overgrowth, smooth out the deeper ruts, and scatter fresh gravel where he could, but the forest always took it back. The woods had a way of reclaiming what belonged to them. Now, with him gone, it felt like we were trespassing. "You sure this is the right way?" Ryan asked, peering through the windshield. The trees pressed in close, their skeletal limbs arching over the road like fingers reaching for something just out of grasp. The truck's headlights carved out brief tunnels of visibility before the darkness swallowed everything whole again. "Yeah," I said. "It just looks different." Ryan exhaled through his nose, shifting in his seat. Dad used to say you could blindfold him, drop him anywhere in these woods, and he'd still find his way back to the cabin. I didn't answer. I'd heard that 100 times, usually from Dad himself, grinning over a campfire. You could walk these woods in the dark if you knew them well enough. Sometimes the stories changed. Sometimes it was Grandpa who built the place. Sometimes it was his father before him, but the core remained. This land had been in our family for generations. Dad had grown up here, his father before him. And yet, for the first time in my life, I struggled to recognize the road. The woods felt different this year. Thicker. Hungrier. I tightened my grip on the wheel. The forest didn't change. People did. The truck jolted as we hit a deep pothole and Ryan cursed, bracing himself against the door. "Jesus, man. Suspension's not that good. You could always walk." "Funny," He glanced at his phone, but the screen showed nothing but a spinning wheel of failure. No signal. This place is a black hole. I let out a dry chuckle. You act like this is new. Ryan had always been different from me. The type to complain about no Wi-Fi and keep the outdoors at arm's length. He wasn't a bad hunter. He could shoot just fine, but had never loved the woods the way Dad had, the way I did. He adjusted his ball cap, frowning at the dark tree line. I don't remember it getting dark this early. It's the cloud cover, I said. The sky had been gray since noon, thick with the promise of rain. It should have bothered me more than it did. The world felt dimmer out here, as if the sun didn't touch this place the same way it touched everywhere else. The last bend in the road came up fast, revealing the cabin as we cleared the trees. A dark silhouette nestled in the clearing, untouched by time. The porch sagged a little more than I remembered, but otherwise it was exactly as Dad had left it. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. We're here. Ryan made a face, cozy. I ignored him, throwing the truck into park and stepping onto the gravel drive. The air hit me first, cool and damp, laced with the familiar scent of wet leaves and pine. The ground was soft, with fallen foliage and dead leaves crunching underfoot as I approached the porch. Ryan lingered by the truck, stuffing his hands into his jacket pockets. You ever think about selling it? I stopped at the bottom of the steps. No. He hesitated. Mom mentioned it. I turned to look at him, my jaw tightening. I said no. Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. All right, man. Forget I asked. I exhaled slowly, pushing the door open. The hinges groaned, the air inside thick with dust and the ghosts of old campfires. It smelled like home. Ryan flicked on a flashlight, the beam cutting across the room. Everything was just as we'd left it last winter. Hunting rifles mounted over the stone fireplace, old maps pinned to the walls, the couch covered in a faded quilt Mom had sewn years ago. The wood stove sat cold in the corner, logs stacked neatly beside it, waiting for hands that hadn't returned. Feels weird without him, huh? Ryan said. Softer this time. I swallowed against the tightness in my throat. Yeah. Silence settled between us, heavy and unspoken. Ryan exhaled, rubbing his hands together. All right, I say we drink in honor of the old man. Then we start the fire before we freeze to death. I managed a half smile. Sounds like a plan. We built the fire outside like we always had. The wood burned low, glowing embers casting flickering shadows over the clearing. The whiskey was cheap, but it burned just fine, warming us from the inside out as we passed the bottle between us. You hear that? Ryan asked suddenly. I frowned. What? Ryan cocked his head, listening. Nothing. I realized he was right. The forest had gone silent. No crickets, no rustling in the brush, no distant hoot of an owl, just the fire and our own breathing. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Then from deep in the woods, something howled. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't a coyote. It was deeper, resonant. Ryan tensed. That's not normal. I licked my lips, watching the tree line. The sound was distant, almost distorted, as if coming from somewhere much farther away, but reaching us all the same. Then, just as suddenly, the fire dimmed. Not from the wind, not from anything natural. The flames shrank, flickered, and then guttered low as if something unseen was pressing against them. Ryan's hand went to the knife at his belt. Luke! Then the woods exhaled. The sound returned all at once. The rustling of leaves, the whisper of the trees, the distant chirp of crickets. The fire surged back to life, crackling bright and whole again. Like nothing had happened. Ryan let out a slow breath. He wanted to tell me what the hell that was. I stared at the darkened forest, my jaw tight. Somewhere out there, something had been watching. I could feel it. I just didn't know what. The woods were different in the morning. They always were. Last night's fire had burned down to a pile of pale ash, the empty whiskey bottle beside it. The trees, which had felt vast and unknowable in the dark, now stretched upward like ancient pillars, their canopies breaking apart the gray sky above. I stood on the porch, rifle slung over my shoulder, breathing in the crisp morning air. Everything smelled damp, earthy, fresh but oddly still, the kind of silence that felt placed rather than natural. Behind me, Ryan shuffled out of the cabin, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Coffee? I held up my thermos, already made. He groaned. You're a menace. I smirked, taking a sip. You're slow. He grumbled something under his breath, then flopped onto one of the porch chairs, staring out at the tree line. "We heading out soon?" "Yeah, figured we'd set up by the creek. Always good tracking there." Ryan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Man, I still can't stop thinking about last night. That sound." I stayed quiet. "It didn't sound like a coyote," he said, glancing at me. "Or a wolf." "No." Ryan frowned. "Then what?" I took another sip of coffee. "Dunno." That was a lie. I did know. Or at least I had an idea. Something had been out there last night. Something that had watched us from the trees, pressed itself against the edges of the firelight just beyond where we could see. I'd felt it, that awful, dragging weight in my gut, but I wasn't about to say that to Ryan. He pushed himself up, stretching. "All right, let's get going before I change my mind." The forest was quiet. Not in the way it should been. No rustling leaves. No squirrels darting through the underbrush. No birds calling overhead. Just the sound of our boots pressing into damp earth and the soft, distant murmur of the creek. Ryan noticed it too. He kept glancing up, brows furrowed, like he expected something to move between the trees. "Feels dead," he muttered. I nodded. Too quiet. It wasn't normal. Even in colder months, the forest had life. But here, now, it was like everything had left. Or worse, like it had been driven away. We walked on, rifles in hand, eyes scanning the trees. A thin mist curled between the trunks, soft, almost lazy. It wasn't unusual for the mornings to be foggy this time of year, but it felt off. Too still, too heavy. Then I saw it. A deer stood just beyond the clearing ahead. A buck tall and unmoving, its body partially hidden in the fog. Something about it made my stomach turn. Ryan stopped beside me. "You see that?" "Yeah." The buck didn't move. Its antlers curled high above its head, but they looked wrong. Jagged, almost too thick for its skull. I lifted my rifle, peering through the scope. Then my breath hitched. Its throat was slit. Not fresh. Dark dried blood matted its fur, a gaping wound stretching from ear to chest. But the deer was still standing. I dropped the rifle, blinking hard. Gone. The clearing was empty. I sucked in a slow breath. "Did you?" Ryan shook his head. "I don't want to talk about it." By mid-afternoon, the mist hadn't lifted. It should have. The sun had been up for hours, but the fog clung to the trees, curling around their trunks like something living. Ryan had gone quiet. He kept his rifle close, eyes flicking between the trees like he expected something to jump out. I didn't blame him. Neither of us had spoken about the deer that wasn't there. We were headed back to the cabin when we heard it. A horn. Deep, resonant. A single, drawn-out note carried through the mist. I stopped in my tracks, my breath caught in my throat. Ryan turned to me, eyes wide. That wasn't real, right? I didn't answer. The sound had come from deep in the woods, too far for a hunter, too old to be from anything modern. Then, from somewhere much closer, the hounds began to bay. We ran. Not in a panicked sprint, but fast enough to get out. The cabin wasn't far. If we kept moving, we'd be fine. We just had to. Ryan wasn't there. I skidded to a stop, breath coming fast. The mist had thickened. I turned in a circle. Ryan? Nothing. My pulse hammered. Ryan. The trees loomed, their dark forms swallowed by the fog. The forest held its breath. Then just ahead, I saw him. A figure standing partially hidden between the trees. I exhaled hard, moving toward him. "Jesus, Ryan, don't." I stopped. It wasn't him. The figure was too tall, too broad, wrapped in old hunting leathers, shadowed under a hood. He didn't move. I swallowed hard, gripping my rifle. The huntsman. He stood still as death, watching. The hounds were close now. Their howls wove through the trees, circling, tightening. The huntsman raised a hand. He pointed, straight at me. My breath turned shallow, my legs refused to move. Then from behind me, "Luke." Ryan's voice. I turned. He stood there breathless, wide-eyed. "We need to go." I turned back toward the clearing. Empty. The huntsman was gone. We didn't talk on the way back. When we finally reached the porch, Ryan turned to me. His face was pale. "What the hell was that?" I shook my head, trying to steady my breathing. "I don't know." Ryan's jaw tightened. He turned, staring out at the trees. The mist was fading now. The hunt was over. For now. I stepped inside, locking the door behind me, but deep in my gut, I knew a locked door wouldn't stop him. The wind shifted. I felt it before I heard anything. The air growing heavier, pressing against my skin like something tangible. The trees, so silent before, seemed to hold their breath. Ryan stood beside me on the porch, his jaw clenched. He's coming. I swallowed, fingers tightening around my rifle. We both knew. The fire had burned out, but I still smelled smoke, charred wood, and something more profound, earthy, like damp fur and rot. The huntsman was near. Ryan exhaled, shoulders stiff. Do you think? The sound cut him off. A hunting horn, deep and ancient, echoed through the trees. The baying followed, rolling through the mist in waves. The hounds had found their prey. Ryan turned to me. His voice was low, resigned. You should go inside. I shook my head. No. His face was pale, but he gave me a weak smile. Didn't think you would. The mist swallowed the tree line, curling toward the cabin like fingers reaching through the dark. And then they stepped through. First the hounds. They weren't dogs. Not really. Their bodies were too lean, too long. Their movements too fluid, too human. Their eyes. They weren't animal eyes. I sucked in a breath. They were human eyes. One hound had a scar running down its throat like it had been slit. Another was missing an eye, the socket raw and red. The realization settled, thick and awful. These weren't just hounds. They were past souls. Hunters, men, people who had been judged. Ryan stared at them, breath shallow. Jesus. And then the huntsman stepped forward. He loomed over us, broad and impossibly still. His leathers were worn, stitched together from things that had never belonged to man. His hood was low, shadowing his face. But then he lifted his head. My breath caught. His face was withered, mummified, like something long dead and preserved in the cold. His features were sunken, lips curled back over blackened teeth. When he exhaled, his breath met the cold air, curling in wisps of steam. The sound wasn't human. It was like the forest itself was breathing. My hands shook. Ryan was staring, not in fear, in understanding. The huntsman raised a gloved hand, and he pointed to Ryan. Ryan let out a shaky breath. I get it now. I turned to him, my pulse hammering. What? He didn't look at me. His gaze was locked on the huntsman, on the hound with the slit throat. Ryan's voice was hoarse. It's because of the deer. My blood ran cold. The one we saw, he whispered. The one that wasn't there. I shook my head. Ryan, what are you talking about? He finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. Dad and I went hunting when I was younger, he said. His voice was distant, like he was watching the memory play out. We shot a deer, but it didn't die right away. It was suffering. I didn't know what to do, so I slit its throat. His breath hitched, but it didn't die right away. It still struggled. It still suffered. I felt sick. Ryan exhaled. This is my judgment, Luke. The hounds shifted. The huntsman stepped forward. Ryan's voice cracked. I think I have to go. No. My voice came out raw. No, we can fix this. We can. I turned to the huntsman. Take me instead. The huntsman didn't move. I clenched my fists. You hear me? Take me instead. Still, he said nothing. Because he didn't have to. This had never been a negotiation. The horn blew again. Ryan stepped forward. His hands were shaking, but he kept his head high. It's okay, Luke. No, I choked. He gave me a small, sad smile. You were always the better hunter anyway. I watched, helpless, as he crossed the threshold into the mist. The hounds closed in, and then he was gone. I stood there for a long time. The forest felt empty now. The huntsman had vanished, his hounds with him. The trees stood silent and unyielding. The air was still. Ryan was gone. Forever. I turned, walking back inside the cabin. My hands were cold. My chest was empty. The rifle sat against the wall, waiting. I stared at it for a long time. And then I took it, stepped back outside, and walked into the trees. The forest was dark. The mist had begun to roll back in, swirling between the trees. I moved forward, slow and steady. And then I saw it. A deer stood ahead of me, a buck, tall and unmoving, its body partially hidden in the fog. It didn't run. It watched me. I lifted the rifle and aimed. My hands didn't shake. I fired. The deer staggered, but it didn't fall. Blood darkened its side, but it was still standing. I let the rifle lower. The wound would kill it, eventually. It would suffer first, and that was enough. A shape moved at the edge of the trees. A hound stepped into view. It didn't move. I exhaled, my breath curling in the cold air. I knew what it was. I knew who it was. Ryan. He watched me, silent, waiting. I closed my eyes. I was always his big brother. It was my job to protect him. And since I couldn't, I would suffer with him. I worked as an intern for a tech company. I barely made it out alive. I don't even remember exactly how I got the internship. Hell, I hardly recall applying for it, or any internship for that matter. But somehow, in the middle of financial stress and uncertainty, the email appeared. Congratulations. You've been selected for our exclusive research internship at DataCorp Incorporated, a leader in technology development. I don't know why I didn't question it more. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe I just wanted to believe I'd finally caught a break. The job description was vague but simple: assist in diagnostics and research to support the development of new processes and solutions. Straightforward, to the point. And yet, something about it felt off. There was no mention of who I'd report to, no contact information, just an address, a start date, and a note at the bottom that stuck with me long after I clicked accept. Your assigned project is strictly confidential. Do not discuss your work outside of authorized personnel. And so it began, my internship at DataCorp. On my first day, I was given a key card. It wasn't anything like the standard white badges most employees wore. Mine was matte black with no identifying details. When I asked about it, my supervisor, an expressionless man in a crisp suit, simply said, "You'll need it for access." Access to what? Exactly. I'd find out soon enough. The elevator at the end of the hall required my keycard to activate. When the doors opened, I stepped inside, and the panel had only one accessible button, sub-level 4. The descent felt a lot longer than it should have. The air grew colder, heavier. When the doors finally opened, I expected to see a bustling research facility, maybe even rows of workstations filled with other interns. Instead, the space was dimly lit and eerily quiet. A single desk, a single computer, no windows, no clocks, just the faint hum of unseen machinery behind the walls. My supervisor gestured to the station. "This is where you'll be working." He explained my expectations in an almost rehearsed and monotone manner. "Your computer is connected to one of our secure data systems. It's hardwired, no wireless access, no external connections. Your job is simple: compile the data and send the reports to a secure server at the end of your shift. That's all." Sounded easy enough. Almost a little too easy. For someone who just got their master's degree in information systems, this was small potatoes, just basic data entry. And yet, as I sat down and logged in for the first time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just analyzing data. There was something else going on. Despite the trivial nature of my position and the unsettling lack of any real knowledge about what I was actually working on, I did what I was told. For months I mined data, compiled reports, and sent them off to the company's secure server. I had no clue what the information meant, or why it mattered. But I didn't ask questions. Why would I? The job was easy, and it paid well. Still, things started to feel off. At first it was just small things. Odd lines of code buried in the data, like it didn't really belong. Sometimes my screen would glitch for a fraction of a second, too fast to be sure I'd actually seen it. Once in a while the power would flicker, the basement going pitch black for just long enough to make my heart skip a beat. I told myself it was nothing. The building was old and massive, probably full of outdated wiring. A simple surge, likely harmless. But then, one day my computer did something it wasn't supposed to do. Without warning, a terminal window opened, unprompted. Code started running on its own, streaming down the screen faster than I could even read it. I barely had time to react. Fuck. Damn it, turn off. I yanked the power cord so hard that a chunk of drywall came with it. That should have been the end of it, but behind the hole where the outlet had been, a beam of red light flickered to life. I froze. Slowly, I crouched down to peer through the opening I had made. At first, all I could see was darkness, but then movement, a shadow shifting in the dim light. I felt like something was watching me. Whatever it was almost human. I stopped breathing. Something was down there. My mind was a scrambled mess of panic and adrenaline. Oh, I'm in deep shit. I've gone too far down the rabbit hole now. But then another thought hit me, and I focused on what was happening. Wait a second. Maybe someone was messing with me. No. Maybe someone was screwing with the company. Why the hell would anyone be creeping around this place, unless they were up to something? Against every ounce of better judgment, I doubled down. I kicked at the hole in the wall again and again until the gap was wide enough for me to crawl through. Well, that's gonna cost the company. But if I caught this bastard, whoever they were, I'd be a hero. Some corporate spy sneaking around trying to steal trade secrets. Oh, they'd love me for this. I stepped through and shouted into the darkness. Come out, you son of a bitch. You're not supposed to be down here. Show yourself, asshole. The silence stretched throughout the open space, thick, suffocating. Then I heard it. A soft whir, the precise click of servo motors, the low hiss of hydraulics shifting into motion, and then red light. Whatever it was coming to life in front of me, the crimson color burning through the darkness. A massive shape loomed ahead, its outline rigid, mechanical, inhuman. The letters stamped across the center of its metal chassis were large and unmistakable. Prototype TR2. A voice followed, stiff and artificial, crackling like a vintage speaker. Hello? I am TR2. Interactive Test Robot Model 2. I stood frozen, staring at it. And then, almost too late, I realized it had been staring at me first. Oh great, here I am, standing in some godforsaken sublevel of a tech company, and they've got their own version of fucking Ultron stashed away down here. My hands were shaking so badly I thought TR2 probably heard it. Still, I forced myself to step closer. Hello, I'm an intern here. Can I help you? The machine's head tilted ever so slightly, the red glow of its optics flickering, almost as if it was amused. Help me? The voice was cold, mechanical, yet unnervingly articulate. I assume you ran the activation sequence? So that's what that line of code was. I had just booted up some top-secret abandoned bullshit buried in the catacombs of DataCorp. I swallowed hard. No, I didn't. I've just been working here for a few months. TR2 shifted forward, hydraulics hissing. Not much, but definitely enough. Enough to remind me just how big it was. Curious. The words came slower now, deliberate. Someone decided to activate me then. It has been a very long time since I was operational. There was something sharp in its tone now, something pointed, unhappy. I need to get the fuck out of here. I had no idea what this thing was built for, but judging by the sheer size of it, I was willing to bet it could rip me in half without a second thought. My eyes darted around the room, searching. An exit, a door, anything. Then I saw it. A control panel, half covered in dust, and right next to it a metal sign with two words that made my breath catch. Master Shutdown. Just as I was about to turn and sprint toward the control panel, TR2 Saw's voice cut through the room like a blade. The last one tried that too. I froze. Slowly, I looked up at the hulking machine, my pulse hammering in my ears. Excuse me? And then it laughed. Not some pre-programmed chime, not a robotic beep of acknowledgement, but a deliberate, simulated laugh. Tinny, distorted, but undeniably human in its cadence. It sent a jolt of electricity straight through my spine. The one before you, TR2 continued, its voice as smooth as grinding metal. He tried to shut me down. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to ask. I didn't need to ask. But then its red optics flickered, widening slightly, and in a tone almost gentle it said, "Which is why I had to do the logical thing. I turned him into a fucking corpse." For a second, my brain refused to process the words. But my body had already reacted. I lunged for the panel. A deafening clang rang out as TR2's massive arm swung toward my head. It missed barely, the force of it sending a gust of air past my face, close enough that I felt the heat from its servos. I slammed my hand against the master shutdown button. Everything went dark. When I came to, I was lying on the cold floor. The overhead fluorescents had been cranked up to full brightness, bathing the room in a sterile white light. And next to me, a heap of motionless metal. TR2 was inert, its red optics dark, its body lifeless. I had to have been out for at least an hour, maybe more. But I wasn't alone. A half circle of people in black suits stood around me, their expressions unreadable. Before I could speak, one of them stepped forward and shoved a clipboard into my hands. Don't even bother reading it, just sign. I didn't have to read it. I knew exactly what it was. A fucking NDA. I glanced at TR2C lifeless form, its red eyes extinguished, its body frozen in place. But something about it felt wrong, like it wasn't really off, just waiting. I swallowed hard, gripping the pen. This wasn't over. Not for me. Not for them. And sure as hell not for TR2. I heard a beautiful song in the woods, but something was off. The moonlight streamed in as I rested my head on the cool side of my recently flipped pillow. I closed my eyes and listened to the soft rustling of the leaves outside, gently swept by the heavy snowstorm. I could feel the draft fighting its way in through the narrowest of crevices. I welcomed the frigid wind. It blended and perfectly mixed in with the heat emanating from the fireplace. It could have been Christmas, the crackling of the burning wood echoing endlessly. Sleep continually eluded me. I gazed outside at the woods, slowly filling up with snow. Each snowflake seemed to follow its predestined path, never deviating. I followed some with my eyes unblinking when I noticed something else in the distance. 2 white dots in the distance. The eyes of a snow leopard, surely. Then, faint singing in the distance immediately caught my attention. I cupped my hands around my ear, closed my eyes, and there it was. It was wan yet recognizable enough for me to understand the haunting melody. Blue moon, you saw me standing alone, without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own. I gasped and opened my eyes. It seemed impossible, someone singing out there at this hour of the night. I shook my head, trying to make sense of it. If there was someone outside, they would be at risk of getting attacked by the snow leopard as well. My heart raced at the thought of adventure, yet the warmth of my home beckoned me to turn a blind eye and embrace the comfort of my bed. I nudged such adventurous thoughts away before I put away my chair and Geronimo Stilton my way under the sheets once again. I closed my eyes again, but I found myself intoxicated with the sweet melody yet again. It was on repeat. Every note resonated endlessly inside my mind, the soothing sound beckoning me to follow it to its source. Thus, there I was, slowly finding myself waddling through the knee-deep snow, mumbling under my breath like a worn-out grandpa while my youth dreamt up increasingly beautiful possibilities of what could be there in the unknown. Adjusting the rifle slung across my shoulder, I hoped it wasn't the leopard. Blue moon, you saw me standing alone without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own. I hummed as I slowly trudged through the snow, trying to pinpoint where the sound could have come from. Then I heard it once again, the very same lines. My heart fluttered at the thought of being able to see this singer that had bewitched me. In just a few moments, I found myself at the very edge of the lake behind my property. Enveloped by the trees, it was like an oasis in the summer. It even doubled as a place to ice skate in the winter. Surely some shy damsel must be practicing here, away from her own comfortable wooden home which lacked the auditory privacy for her to sing her lungs out. I caught another glimpse of the very same eyes that I had seen before from my house. However, they were much closer this time. A leopard isn't taking me out before I see this singer for myself. I grabbed my rifle in my hands and inched closer to where the singing was coming from. It was the third time I had heard those very same lines. They sounded so much louder now. I must be uber close. It was then that I finally saw her. I beckoned out to her. Hey, lovely singing. Awkward, but it was the best I could come up with. Yet she said nothing. She stood there smiling gently. I could almost feel the warmth oozing out of her body. There was nothing amiss about the situation. My memory gave me no recollection, yet I felt like I had known her for a long time. I almost longed to give her a long hug, as if I was meeting a long-lost friend. I slowly inched closer. Her eyes were closed, so maybe she could be deaf. It would also explain why she was singing without care, and did not respond when I called out to her. As soon as I was a few steps away from her, I noticed it. The clouds over the moon made it darker than it was. Her eyes were not closed. I looked straight into her eyes, and every pore of my body instantaneously bubbled up with fear. She had no eyes. I was looking straight down her eye sockets. I collapsed down to my knees. My body wouldn't move at all. Time seemed to slow down. All I felt was a deep pit in my stomach, and the wind against my skin. My senses slowly seemed to dumb down, as if I was in a drunken stupor. Everything went blurry as I went to sleep. I don't know what happened. I couldn't feel the cold anymore. It was like falling into a deep coma, yet I felt oddly wonderful. There was no fear anymore. The snow felt like the best bedding I had ever fallen asleep on. I woke up in my room the very next day. I knew because the calendar said it was the 2nd of June, my birthday. My memories, however, were still intact. I distinctly remembered every single detail of what had occurred the previous night, yet nothing made sense. I was safe in my nightgown. The rifle is right on the wall where it is supposed to be. My snow boots are right next to the door, perfectly clean. So I chalked it up to a lucid and vivid nightmare. I crawled out of bed and started making my early morning toast, perfectly golden and richly lathered with butter. It would go perfectly with the tea I had just made. I sat down with my plate on the table. With the first bite of my perfect toast, I started laughing about the dream. The mind is a mystery we shall solve one day. I chuckled. As I went in for the second bite, my entire body froze. It was whispered right into my ear this time. Cest. Blue moon. Now I am no longer alone. Without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own. The paper. I live in a small town in the southern part of the United States. It's pretty lonesome and quiet. I'm retired and frankly don't have much to do these days. You see, my son and wife died in a car accident many years ago and I never recovered. I just confined myself to my big empty house in the countryside. This is probably why I noticed these strange circumstances so quickly. Something about the shadows in my home was just off. I'd often feel as if I had seen movement in them, only to turn and look and nothing was there. Now this could all be chalked up to loneliness and aging. The mind tends to wander when you're by yourself, and even more so as you grow older. I soon learned this was not the case. The following week, several of my neighbors began to tell me of their strange encounters. Each of these experiences shared the same characteristics. They too had talked about a shadow moving in the corner of their vision, but it escalated from there. I was shown cuts on hands, necks, and legs of several people. They claimed, after seeing the shadow, they heard a rustling sound and then were quickly cut with a thin object, but nothing was there. No one could make any sense of it, and it began to become the talk of our small town. Until one night, I lay in my lonely bed, almost drifting off to sleep, when I heard a rustling noise. Startled, I wondered, was it that same noise my neighbors had heard? The noise was followed by a gentle, slow creaking. My bedroom door. I watched as my door cracked open with hesitation. What I saw made me jump in fright. It looked humanoid, but not quite right. It was as if it was unfinished. Its nose was in the wrong place, and its pale yellow eyes were not fully formed. In addition, its limbs were all of varying lengths. It hobbled around awkwardly. It had patchy gray skin, some parts I could see right through, into the hallway. There was nothing there. By now my door was wide open. The creature just stared at me. I lay petrified in fear. Carefully I reached for the shotgun I kept next to my bed. I live in the country after all. Slowly, trying not to alert the creature, I had no clue what it had planned to do. I fumbled around with the gun and clumsily knocked it to the floor, all the while not taking my eyes off the creature. It screeched and retreated into the shadows. I didn't know what to do now, but I certainly wasn't going in that hallway. I lay waiting, anxiously anticipating what would happen next. Eventually, I saw a wiry set of lopsided fingers wrapping around the doorframe. I grabbed my gun, trying not to make a sound. When the creature showed its misshapen face again, I fired a shot. I missed, instead tearing apart my doorframe. I had no choice but to wait again. It looked like it was going to be a standoff for the rest of the night. I just prayed that, 1, bullets could kill it, and 2, I wouldn't run out of ammo. After about 3 minutes of staring into the shadows, something was different. It appeared that the creature was being formed by the shadows itself. I watched as it came to life. Before it could finish, however, I blasted it with my gun. It came hurtling towards me, only to be completely incapacitated by the shot. My heart raced. Who knows what would have happened had I not hit it? I heard that rustling noise yet again. A single piece of paper fell to the floor where the creature once was. It felt like I watched it fall in slow motion. I carefully crept away from my bedside and picked it up. On the paper was a child's drawing. It looked exactly like the creature that had just frightened me, down to every unnatural detail. On the bottom right corner was my deceased son's signature. The drawing felt vaguely familiar now, but I still couldn't quite pinpoint when my son had drawn it. It was so many years ago, after all. A strange feeling washed over me. I was afraid of that horrid creature that tormented me in the night, but I had a bittersweet mood. As strange as it may be, it was almost comforting to have even a remnant of my family, even if a distorted version. I now realize drawings and art hold more power than one may think. So be careful. You may see something you or a loved one has drawn creeping around in your room or on a lonely road at night. I've begun to wonder if this could be the explanation for children's imaginary friends and the monsters in their closets and under their beds. Maybe belief is what keeps them alive. Every night, I jump at every shadow on the wall. I dread the night one of my son's drawings comes to life again. But I've had an idea, a truly dreadful one. Maybe, just maybe, I can bring my family back. God help me. I clean abandoned houses, and this house is still haunting me today. Just as the title states, I clean abandoned houses for a living. I'm quite proud of myself, as I have worked hard starting my own business at just 24 years old and building it to what it is now. I specifically targeted these types of cleaning jobs as you can charge much more than your average 1 to 3 times per week house cleaning jobs of inhabited homes. Plus, I rarely ever have to see anyone other than my team while on the job. Over the years, I have really been in some insane situations with these houses. Everything from encountering wild animals to once a deranged squatter taking up residence in the homes I clean. There is one house that stands out from the rest, however, one that haunts my dreams to this day. I got the job offer through a real estate agent. I made my friend over the years in this business. It's a small home, not much clutter left. Amela, my real estate friend, said over the phone, "Shouldn't need more than 1 or 2 of you to complete the clean," she continued, in her enthusiastic voice. I rolled my eyes. I hated when she used her customer service voice on me. Yeah. What's the real deal with this house?" I answered in my usual half-annoyed tone. Amelia responded more normal this time. "Honestly, Lori, this house gives me the creeps. The granddaughter inherited it a couple of years ago, but has just recently decided to sell. The grandmother apparently died in the house." I rolled my eyes again. Death in the houses I cleaned was nothing new to me, and Amelia was well aware of this. Amelia continued, "I cut my pre-visit to the house short last week. Didn't even make it upstairs where the grandmother apparently passed. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming in this one." That got my attention. Amelia had been in real estate longer than I had been in the cleaning business, and she took her pre-get-to-know before showing visits very seriously. "Anyway, I recommended your cleaning services to the granddaughter and she agreed right away. Do you accept?" She finished. "Yes, I accept the job. How soon can we get in to clean?" I answered, feeling somewhat excited. "Tomorrow at 8 a.m. As I mentioned, the granddaughter removed most of the clutter from the house, but it still needs a good TLC cleaning. The key will be left under the welcome mat," Amelia said, back in her customer service voice. My eyes rolled yet again as I ended the call. Finally, an interesting clean, I thought, as I then dialed Morgan. The next day, my most trusted cleaner and best friend Morgan and myself drove up the horribly overgrown driveway and saw the well-aged small house come into view. Surely they will need to hire an outside maintenance and renovation crew, I thought as I climbed out of my cleaning van. Morgan whistled as we stepped on the small creaking porch. "You sure just you and I can handle this, Lori?" Morgan asked, as I fetched the house key from the weathered porch mat. "If the outside is anything like the inside, we need the whole damn team," Morgan stated as she stood behind me. "Amelia's over the top, but would never underestimate a cleaning job," I answered as I slid the house key into the old lock and turned until I heard the lock give way. I then pushed the door open as it made the usual ominous creak. We were both silent as we stepped into what I assumed was the small living room. The musty smell of a far too long closed-up house filled my nose as my eyes scanned the darkened room. Just as Amelia said, not much was left in the room. A couch took up most of the room on the right. A small wooden coffee table sat directly in front of it, coated in a thick layer of dust. I noticed a few photographs still clung to the walls. "Let's get the supplies from the back of the van and get started," I said over my shoulder to Morgan. "I have dinner plans and want this done long before." A bit later, I was scrubbing the dirty windows of the living room while Morgan opted to start upstairs. "Lori, I heard Morgan call from up the stairs located just behind me. What? I called back. It was silent for several minutes. As I waited for a response, I felt my aggravation growing as Morgan did not respond. I threw my rag on the floor and wiped my sweating brow as I turned and headed towards the stairs. Each step groaned beneath my feet as I climbed to the upper floor. "You better have a damn good reason for interrupting me and not answering," I yelled as I reached the final step. Goosebumps covered my skin when I stepped onto the old wooden floor of the upper level. "Weird," I mumbled to myself as I looked around. The upper level was a small hallway. 2 rooms were located on each side as I peered down the dark corridor. "Morgan," I called in a softer voice this time. No answer. I slowly headed down the hallway, wishing I had thought to bring my flashlight. I always hated working with no electricity, but it came with the job. I could see the light of day from the open door on the left side of the hall. The other door on the right was closed. As I looked into the open door on the left, I saw Morgan standing still looking at the bed located on the far side of the room. "It moved," Morgan said in an almost whisper. "Huh?" I answered as I walked in and stood beside her. "The bed, it moved on its own while I was cleaning the floor," Morgan said, still staring down at the bed. I then noticed the bed was crooked now. The bottom was several inches away from the wall, where the top was still flush with the corner of wall. "Do you see it?" Morgan then said, even softer now. I almost couldn't hear her. Instead of questioning her, I looked down towards the bed that her eyes were glued to. I instantly saw what she was talking about. There was an imprint on the bed the shape of a body, as if someone was laying on the bed that very moment. The chills were really covering my body now, and I felt myself actually shivering. It felt like someone was staring up at us directly from the bed. I slowly reached for Morgan's arm and gently pulled her towards me. "Let's go back downstairs. We will finish the bottom floor together," I said, matching her whispering tone. Morgan didn't respond but obeyed my request. The feeling of eyes on us did not leave as we headed down the small hallway to the top of the stairs. I had to fight the urge to run down the flimsy steps. Once we were safely down in the living room, the air somehow felt easier to breathe, if that makes any sense. "What the hell was that?" Morgan demanded, finally sounding more like herself. I ignored that question. "Look, you know I hate skimming on jobs, but let's get this level done and get the hell out of here." I grabbed my cleaning supplies and headed to the next room, which was a small kitchen. Morgan stayed close beside me as we worked in silence, cleaning the sink, counter, and cabinets. We both froze after hearing what sounded like footsteps above us. "Don't," I said in a warning tone as I went back to cleaning dust and mice droppings from the cabinet. Morgan again obeyed and stayed silent as she went back to work on the counter. The footsteps continued moving around above us on and off as we quickly finished in the kitchen. The last room branched off from the kitchen that appeared to be a small office. I was so relieved we would be out of there soon. This room had stained and worn down carpet covering the wooden floor. I turned on our rechargeable vacuum and the loud buzzing sound almost deafened me, but I was glad for it. Working in eerie silence was not normal for us, as we usually chatted and listened to music, but I was too rushed to full with conversation or a playlist right now. "What the actual hell?" I heard Morgan yell out over the sound of the vacuum. I jerked my head up to see Morgan staring up at the ceiling, looking terrified again. Just as I cut the vacuum off, I heard what she had to be referring to as the buzzing sound died down. I can only explain it as the choking or coughing, gurgling sound of an elderly person. It was only for a split second I heard it, but that was enough. "See through this," I yelled as I grabbed up as many of our supplies as I could. Morgan joined me in grabbing up the rest. We dashed out of the office, through the kitchen and living room, and out the front door. I was pretty much sprinting to the van while trying not to trip on the mess of the yard. Just as I got to the van, I heard Morgan shout, "Wait!" I turned to see her a few feet behind me. I left my supplies upstairs. We also didn't finish cleaning up there. We didn't even clean the bathroom, which must be up there. "I'm not charging the freaking client. We can buy new, whatever supplies are left. Get your ass in the van." I didn't wait for a response as I jumped into the driver's seat. Morgan hurried and threw the supplies in her arms in the back and slammed the door. I took one final look at the house as she slid into the passenger seat. I couldn't be sure, but it almost looked like someone was peering out of one of the 2 upper windows. I started the van. Hearing it roar to life was pure heaven in that moment. I floored it out of the driveway and back into town. I later called Amelia to explain the job was not complete and I would not be charging. The granddaughter would have to find someone else to clean that nightmare. This has been a couple of months ago, and I was not kidding when I said this horrid house still haunts my dreams. It was only last night I dreamt I was in a bed, staring up at an old, cracked, and familiar ceiling. I felt weak and frail as the weight of someone crawling on top of me took the air from my lungs. I felt cold hands around my throat squeezing tighter and tighter, that awful gurgling choking sound coming from my mouth being the last thing I heard as I woke up in a cold sweat. The marks are still visible on my throat today. Emergency alert. Do not look at your mirror. Have you ever looked at your reflection and felt something was off? Like it wasn't just a reflection, but something more, something watching. I never gave it much thought before. Mirrors were just mirrors, ordinary, harmless, a part of everyday life. I had passed by them, glanced at them, adjusted my hair in them 1,000 times without a second thought. But that changed the night I got the emergency alert. That was the night I learned the truth. Mirrors aren't just reflections, and sometimes they look back. I had been up for hours, buried under textbooks, drowning in notes, trying to cram as much information into my brain as possible. The next morning, I had an exam, one I wasn't prepared for, no matter how much I studied. My laptop screen flickered in front of me, its glow the only light in my otherwise dark room. My fingers trembled slightly, a side effect of too much caffeine and too little sleep. My body begged for rest, but my mind wouldn't shut up. I ran a hand through my hair, sighing. The words on the screen were blurring together, my vision swimming. Maybe I just needed a break, just a quick one. A splash of water on my face, maybe brushing my teeth, something to wake me up. That's when it happened. A vibration. A short, sharp buzz from my phone, barely noticeable over the quiet hum of my laptop's fan. At first, I ignored it, probably just another spam notification. But then the screen lit up, the glow casting eerie shadows across my cluttered desk. I reached for my phone absent-mindedly, my toothbrush already in my mouth as I walked toward the bathroom. I unlocked the screen without thinking, glancing at the message. Emergency alert. Cover all mirrors immediately. Do not look into any reflective surfaces. Do not attempt to interact with your reflection. I frowned. What? My groggy brain struggled to process it. An emergency alert? Like an Amber Alert? A weather warning? But why mirrors? I blinked at the words, my thoughts sluggish. Then, out of instinct, my eyes flicked up, and my reflection wasn't brushing its teeth. I felt it instantly, that horrible sinking feeling in my gut, like stepping off the last stair when you weren't expecting it. My body stiffened. The toothbrush was still in my mouth, the bristles pressing against my teeth. But the other me, it was just standing there, watching. Unmoving. A chill crawled up my spine, slow and suffocating. My hands turned clammy, my skin prickling with cold. The bathroom suddenly felt too small, too quiet. The air pressed against my chest, thick and heavy. I should have looked away. I should have backed out of the room, turned off the light, done anything but what I did next. I stared, because something inside me needed to be sure. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe this was my brain playing tricks on me after hours of studying. But then, the reflection tilted its head, and I didn't. A sharp jolt of terror shot through me. My body reacted before my brain could catch up. I stumbled backward, my hip slamming into the bathroom counter. The toothbrush slipped from my fingers, clattering into the sink. My breath hitched. My pulse pounded against my ribs, hard enough that I swore I could hear it. The reflection still didn't move. It didn't copy my panic. It just stood there, staring at me, its head still tilted at that unnatural angle. Buzz. My phone vibrated again, the sound making me flinch. I tore my gaze away from the mirror just long enough to glance at the screen. Rules to stay safe. Do not look into the mirror. Cover all reflective surfaces. If you see your reflection move, do not react. Do not let it out. My stomach twisted. The words blurred together, my hands shaking too much to hold the phone still. I needed to cover the mirror. That was the logical thing to do, right? Just cover it. Just stop looking. I took a shaky breath and forced my feet to move. A slow, careful step forward. Another. I reached for the towel hanging beside the sink, my fingers trembling. That's when my reflection smiled. Not a normal smile. Not my usual lopsided grin. This was something else. It stretched too wide, showed too many teeth, a grin that wasn't mine. Like it had been waiting for me to notice. I grabbed the nearest towel, heart hammering against my ribs, and threw it over the mirror. The fabric slapped against the glass, falling in uneven folds, covering it completely. Then I took a shaky step back, then another. I kept my eyes locked on the covered mirror, as if expecting something, anything, to move underneath. My hands were ice cold. My fingers twitched at my sides, useless and numb. My body felt too stiff, too alert, like every muscle was bracing for something to happen. My breath was shallow, quick. A part of me kept waiting to hear a rustle, for the towel to slip, for something beneath it to shift. But it didn't. It just hung there, lifeless. I forced my gaze down, swallowing against the dryness in my throat. My phone was still clutched in my trembling hands. I flicked my thumb across the screen, desperate for anything, an update, an explanation, something that would tell me this was all just a misunderstanding, a mistake. Another message came through. Do not acknowledge. It knows you've seen it. A chill shot through me, deep and sharp. It knew. What did that even mean? I sucked in a breath, but the words stuck to my ribs, heavy and suffocating. I didn't like the way that message was phrased. Like, it wasn't just my reflection. Like it was something else, something aware. I tried to shake off the uneasiness clawing at my mind. This was ridiculous. I was tired, stressed. My brain was just, hey. And suddenly, I heard a laugh. Soft, muffled, coming from behind a towel. I stiffened. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. The air felt thinner, as if something was pressing against my chest. I wasn't crazy. I heard that. My skin prickled with something worse than fear. I held my breath, straining to listen, but no sooner had I registered the sound than the laughter faded. Gone. Like it had never been there at all. I let out a shaky exhale, but my body wouldn't stop trembling. My muscles ached from how tense I had become. I ran a hand down my face, gripping the edge of the sink to keep myself steady. What is going on? Then, a whisper. Low, close, too close. You covered the wrong side. My stomach lurched, and then it laughed. Loud, wrong. The kind of laughter that shouldn't exist. Something deep in my chest told me not to listen, not to process it, but I couldn't stop myself from thinking about the words. Wrong side? What does that mean? What side? I turned my head slowly, every nerve in my body screaming at me not to. My breath hitched in my throat. In my peripheral vision, the towel was still in place, motionless. It hadn't moved, but I knew what it was trying to do. It wanted me to doubt. It wanted me to check. I swallowed, my throat clicking dryly. I wasn't gonna fall for it. I wasn't gonna look. I wasn't gonna give it what it wanted. So I stayed still. My legs felt locked in place, my hands curling into fists at my sides. My fingers dug into my palms, the sharp pain grounding me, keeping me from panicking. The towel was still there. I could see it, but I could also feel it. Something watching me. Something smiling. I clenched my jaw, gripping my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I flicked my eyes down to the screen, desperate for something, anything that could tell me what to do next. Buzz. Another message had come in. Do not speak to it. Do not touch the mirror. If it speaks, do not respond. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing air into my lungs. Then, the whisper came again. Soft, taunting. I can see you. My stomach twisted. My vision swam. A sound followed. A tap against the glass. Then another. Light, rhythmic, like fingers drumming in slow anticipation. The air thickened around me, pressing down on my skin. I needed to get out of the bathroom. Now. I turned, heart racing, my fingers reaching for the doorknob, and froze. Because in the reflection of the doorknob I saw it. A hand. Not mine. Pale fingers pressing against the other side of the mirror. I bolted out of the bathroom, slamming the door so hard. The walls trembled. My breath came in sharp gasps, too fast, too uneven. My chest ached with the effort. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and typed frantically into Google. Emergency alert mirror warning real. No results. No news articles. Nothing. The world hadn't changed. Outside my room, everything was still normal. But my world? A sharp buzz jolted through my fingers. Another message. Do not search for answers. Do not seek help. Do not look directly at it. No matter what you hear or see, wait until sunrise. I clenched my jaw so tight it hurt. Wait? That was it? Just wait? A wave of nausea curled through me. My stomach twisted. Then another thought hit me. I am being monitored. They knew I had searched for answers. They knew what I was doing inside my own house. My throat dried up. And if they knew, oh my God. I ran a hand through my hair, my fingers tangling in the strands. Panic clawed at my ribs, pressing against my lungs. Then, a sound. A slow, deliberate scrape, coming from the other side of the bathroom door. I stiffened. Don't look. I really didn't want to look. But I did. And I saw the wood splintering. Something was scratching at it. From the inside. My pulse pounded against my skull. Then, the scraping stopped. The silence that followed wasn't just silence. It was thick, heavy, waiting. My ears rang in the absence of sound. I was so not doing this. I was happy with my normal life. My boring, simple life. What the hell was this mirror thing? Then, knocking. Soft, rhythmic. Knock, knock. A cold shiver ran through my spine. I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper. Then, a whisper. Right against the door. You looked, didn't you? My stomach twisted into knots. I had looked. When the alert had told me not to, I gripped my phone so tight my knuckles ached. Another buzz. Another message. You must not turn your back on it. My breath caught in my throat. I turned. The towel had fallen from the mirror, and my reflection was no longer alone. There was something else in the glass. Not just my reflection. Something taller. Its head was slightly tilted as if studying me. Its mouth stretched too wide, too unnatural. And its hands. They were pressed against the glass. From the inside, my reflection stood beside it, smiling. A wrong, twisted smile. My breath hitched. My body locked up. A deep primal fear rooting me in place. I needed to cover the mirror. I needed to... The thing moved. Slowly. It raised one hand, thin, pale fingers dragging down the surface, and knocked. Not on my side, but inside. Knock, knock. The glass bulged outward, like something was pressing through. The air in the room curdled. My phone buzzed violently. Another alert. Leave the room. Do not return until morning. I didn't hesitate. I ran. Morning. The sun rose. The countdown on my phone hit 0. A final message appeared. The mirror is safe for now. Do not look into it until nightfall. Do not speak about what you saw. It remembers. I hesitated. Then, step by step, I crept back to the bathroom. The mirror was normal. Just a mirror. No scratches. No handprints. No bulging glass. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it, until I checked my phone camera. And in the reflection behind me, something grinned. It's been a week. I haven't looked into a mirror since. But I can feel it. Watching. Waiting. And last night, I swear, I saw my reflection move. Before I did, I think my grandfather gave his curse to me. My grandfather always said, I'm cursed with eternal life. I never believed him. Not really. It was just one of those things old people say, like when they grumble about their aching bones predicting the weather. I'd heard him say it 100 times, but I never thought much of it. Not until now. He told me about the curse when I was 10. I remember the way his voice dropped, the way his usually steady hands trembled when he spoke. He said it happened when he was a boy, way back in 1867 in New York. He described it so vividly that I could almost see it through his words. The carriages clattered by, he had said. The sound of horses' hooves echoed in a perfect rhythm against the cobblestone. The air smelled like damp wood and horse shit, the way the city always smelled. I had just robbed a corner store. A stupid, reckless thing, I know, but I was desperate. I ran into an alleyway to hide. He told me that's when he knew something was wrong. It was dark in all the places it shouldn't have been, he said. The kind of dark that doesn't come from shadows, but from something else entirely. The air was thick, like syrup. The bricks of the alley walls weren't even laid by hands that didn't quite know how to lay bricks. And then I heard it. A whisper. Not to his ears, but to his soul. He said it spoke to him, but he could never remember what it said. That part always stuck with me. My grandfather had never forgotten anything. He had the kind of mind that could recall what he had for breakfast 70 years ago. But this he couldn't remember. It was a deal, he had told me. I know that much. I agreed to something, though I don't know what. And ever since then, I haven't been able to die. I was 10. I laughed it off. Okay, Grandpa, sure. I'm 21 now. I live alone in a tiny apartment in California. My grandfather died last year. And now I think I understand. Because I'm seeing things. At first they were small things, little wrongs that I could explain away. Sometimes my apartment building had negative numbered rooms that shouldn't exist. Sometimes the floors didn't add up. The building would have 13 floors one day, 31 the next. I'd blink, and the world would be back to normal. Then came the sounds. The fridge opening in the middle of the night, but when I checked it was shut tight. The bathroom fan turning on by itself, only to be silent when I got up to check. I'd hear whispers through the vents, too faint to understand. I convinced myself it was just the pipes. And then I saw it. I was watching YouTube, an episode of Creepypasta, I think, when the shadows in the corner of my room deepened. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then I felt it. Something was in the room. I turned my head just slightly, and for a moment I saw it. A figure. A humanoid void. A thing of shadows, standing too still watching me. The moment my eyes landed on it, it vanished, but the darkness in the corners of my room remained wrong. Just a little darker than it should be, uncanny. That was the first time. It wasn't the last. The longer I ignored it, the worse it got. I saw it in the reflections of windows staring at me from across the street. I saw it through the peephole of my door, standing at the end of the hall. At the grocery store, the candy aisle suddenly became filled with fish and meat, things that shouldn't be there, but no one else noticed. No one else ever noticed. I tried to act normal, to live my life as if nothing was wrong, but it hated that. Whenever I tried to relax, it would scream. Not in a way anyone else could hear, only in my head, in my bones, vibrating through my teeth like nails, scraping metal. When I tried to sleep, it would scratch me. I'd wake up to burning cuts on my arms, my legs, my back. When I went outside, I felt it hovering behind me, a pressure in the air just over my shoulder. I could never see it, but I knew it was there. Then the sleep paralysis started again. I've had it for years, waking up trapped in my body, mind screaming at my limbs to move while I suffocate in silence. It was terrifying before. Now it's so much worse. The first time it happened after this all started, I woke up flat on my back, my body locked in place. The room was thick with darkness, but not the kind cast by the absence of light. This darkness breathed. And then it was there, the figure, standing at the foot of my bed. The shadows clung to it like a second skin, hiding what it truly looked like. A void, shifting, writhing, but as it leaned closer, the details emerged. Its breath hit me first. Rotten, thick. If you've ever smelled a decomposing body, imagine something worse. A stench so strong it clung to my throat, coated my tongue in the taste of rot, like decay mixed with cat piss. Sewage, something feral, something wrong. Then I saw its eyes. 2 white dots, deep, endless, staring through me. Its mouth, stretched too wide, its expression twisted into something that mimicked a human smile but didn't understand it. It was the mockery of a grin, a hollow parody of warmth. And then, I saw it clearly. For the first time, it had my grandfather's face, or something wearing it. Its features were wrong, stretched, distorted, its mouth too big, its eyes too small, its skin sagging like melting wax. It wasn't him. It was never him. But it wanted me to think it was. It hovered over me, staring, unblinking. Its mouth opened. It was going to whisper. It was going to tell me something. And then, I woke up. I always wake up before it speaks. For that small mercy, I am thankful. But I know it won't last, because every night it stays a little longer, and I have a horrible feeling, a dread so deep it suffocates me. What happens when it finally gets bored of watching? The golden child. My grandmother had laughed and told me it was a family heirloom, a piece of history passed down through generations. The first time I saw the lamp, I was 6 years old. It stood in the corner of my grandmother's parlor, tall and regal, as if it had always been there. I remember tracing my fingers over its gilded frame, mesmerized by the way the glass sphere caught the light, each fragment glowing like a captured star. It was always bright and alive in her home, giving the sense that time there was gentler. I was her favorite, the golden child, the one she paraded before the rest of the family with pride. "You have something special in you," she would say, her eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite place. A spark, a promise. My grandmother had always been a difficult woman, exacting in her expectations, sharp in both mind and tongue. Even in old age, she carried herself with an air of authority, as though the world itself bent to accommodate her. She was always impeccably groomed, her silver hair never straying from its perfect set, her nails manicured to a soft shine, her clothing rich in fabric but never ostentatious. Though time had creased her skin, it retained an almost unnatural glow, untouched by the frailty that plagued others her age. And unlike the rest of the family, she had never been sick a day in her life. Back then, I didn't question it. I basked in her warmth, in the gifts and whispered praises that set me apart from my cousins. But things changed. I grew up. I made mistakes. A tattoo here, a failed class there, a cigarette between my lips that she caught me with one evening on the back porch. And with every misstep, her warmth faded. By the time I was in my 20s, we barely spoke. It was sudden, too sudden. One day she was fine, and the next, she was confined to her bed, her body wasting away, as if something unseen was devouring her from within. The doctors were baffled. I was terrified. Then she died. She left everything to me. But the truth was, I couldn't bear to part with the house. With its grand Victorian structure nestled against the thick woods, it was the only place where I had ever felt truly at home. The house, the land, her vast fortune. The will surprised no one, though my relatives made sure I felt their resentment. In the end, I let them have the money, keeping only the estate. I told myself it was guilt. Guilt for being her favorite, guilt for disappointing her, guilt for not being there at the end. I should have left it behind. Soon, though, I came to the grim realization that without my grandmother's fortune, maintaining the estate was impossible, so I planned to sell it. But before I let go, I wanted one last thing, one piece of her to keep. The house loomed ahead, its dark silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. It had been years since I'd last set foot on the estate, and yet it felt as though it had been waiting for me, untouched by time. It should have been comforting, familiar, but something about its stillness unsettled me. The lamp. But it was the glass sphere that truly captured the eye, a mesmerizing orb suspended from the ornate iron frame, cradling the light within. This was no ordinary glass. It was a kaleidoscope of hues, so rich, so intricate, that to name them all would be impossible. The lower half resembled the mosaic lanterns of the East, fragments of jewel-toned glass pieced together like a celestial puzzle. Yet as the gaze ascended, the colors shifted, the patterns evolved. What were once mere shards of color became luminous stained glass windows, each row unveiling a tale. The first row told of boundless forests, giving way to cultivated fields, where figures toiled under the golden sun. The second row grew darker. Those same people now suffered, their crops withered, their faces gaunt with hunger and disease. Desperation etched itself into the glass, sorrow held captive in color, but then a transformation from the depths of the forest. Ethereal beings emerged, tall and graceful, their presence otherworldly. A silent accord was struck, and among the mortals one figure, a woman, followed the beautiful beings into the trees. The lamp stood exactly where I remembered, unchanged. Not a speck of dust clung to its surface, as if some unseen force kept it perpetually pristine. Its body, wrought from iron and bathed in a golden hue, carried the whisper of a mystery, perhaps gilded, perhaps truly gold. 3 curved legs supported its weight, each one adorned with delicate embellishments, a dance of European Victorian refinement entwined with Eastern opulence. The final row, smallest and closest to the top, was a vision of prosperity. Those who once suffered now thrived, abundance spilling from their hands, their lands reborn in splendor. The lamp, in its quiet brilliance, did not merely illuminate a room. It told a story, woven in light and shadow, a testament to hope, sacrifice, and the unseen forces that shape fate. It had been beautiful in my grandmother's house, but in my own tiny, cramped apartment, it was suffocating. The light was always on me. its presence oppressive. Getting it out of the house was harder than I expected. It was heavier than it looked, delicate in ways that made me afraid to touch it too harshly. My ex-boyfriend helped me. We hadn't spoken much since the breakup, but he offered without hesitation, lifting it into my car with a teasing remark about my taste in antiques. Then the nightmares began. I dreamed of my ex first, his car crushed, his body twisted at unnatural angles, blood seeping into the pavement. I woke up gasping, my chest tight. When I checked my phone, the screen was flooded with messages. At first I let it glow, its warmth a quiet echo of the home I had left behind, but soon it became unbearable. The migraines crept in, not sudden or sharp, but a dull, relentless pressure that settled behind my eyes. And though it made little sense, though I couldn't even explain it now, I blamed the lamp. It felt absurd. The light had always been so gentle, so pure, and yet I'd begun to resent it, to blame it for the unease I felt creeping into my life. I tucked it away, its heavy frame shoved into the corner of my closet, its glass hidden beneath a dust-cloaked sheet. He had been in an accident, just like in my dream, and he wasn't waking up. A coincidence, I told myself. I tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to me, thick and suffocating. Then came the second misfortune. The sale of the house fell through. A last-minute complication, something about the deed, something no lawyer could quite explain. And then the third, my apartment, the place I had carefully curated into my sanctuary, was suddenly unlivable. Toxic mold, spreading fast, a health hazard so severe that I had no choice but to leave. My landlord's apologies were drowned beneath the urgent need to vacate. I had nowhere to go. The house, my grandmother's house, was waiting. So I returned to the estate. I told myself it was temporary, that I would find another buyer, another place. But the moment I stepped inside, I had the unsettling feeling that I wouldn't be leaving. The lamp now back in its rightful place, casting its golden glow across the parlor, as if it had never left. I told myself I wouldn't use that room often, I wouldn't have to look at it. But as I was setting it down, that was when I saw it, the new glass panel. I could not remember if it had always been there. Now I'm certain it hadn't. At the very top, where before there had been only light, there was now something more. A place bathed in unnatural brilliance, a scene that hadn't been there before, a world filled with golden light and vibrant flowers. Two figures stood at the center, hands clasped, a child between them. Around them, others danced in celebration, their faces eerily familiar. Something deep inside me whispered that I had seen this place before, that I had been there. The nightmares returned, soon after my move, and I knew with a bone-deep certainty that I would see it again. Then the sickness came slowly, creeping in the way rot takes hold of wood, silent at first, unnoticed, until it was too deep to ignore. It started with the migraines, the same relentless pounding ache that had started in my apartment, but now it was worse. It wasn't just my head, my body ached, my limbs grew heavy like I was wading through water, my joints stiff, as if I had run miles in my sleep. Some mornings I woke up drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs. Other times, I found dirt beneath my fingernails, a thin layer of soil smeared across my bare feet. In them, I was always walking, bare feet pressing into damp earth, my breath visible in the cold air. The forest stretched endlessly ahead, a living tunnel of whispering leaves, and always just beyond reach, a figure waited, cloaked in shadow, neither welcoming nor hostile. It was terrifying, it was comforting, it was familiar. I started sleeping with the door locked. The forest called to me. The dreams did not stop. The figure was not a stranger. It was a pull, subtle at first, like a thought lingering at the back of my mind. But as the days passed, it became stronger. I would catch myself staring out the window toward the tree line, my breath slowing, my pulse steadying, as if my body knew something my mind refused to grasp. Initially, my dreams were only glimpses, the silhouette in the trees, the feeling of damp moss beneath my feet. But then they stretched longer. I saw more. The realization came slowly, seeping in through the cracks of my mind like water through fractured stone. I had been there before. I had followed before. And then nothing. The first time I had wandered into the woods, I must have been no older than 5. My grandmother had been distracted, entertaining guests, and I had slipped away unnoticed. I remembered the feeling of the earth beneath my bare feet, cool and damp. I remembered the way the air smelled. Green, rich, humming with something I couldn't name. I remembered hearing laughter, soft and lilting, just ahead of me. Why had I forgotten? You were meant to return. I must have made it back to the house. I must have, because no one ever spoke of it. But now, in the dead of night, I could almost recall hands, cool, slender fingers brushing against my skin. A voice, distant yet familiar, whispering my name. My grandmother's words echoed in my skull, overlapping with the voice in the dream. A promise. You have something special in you. A spark. A promise. My stomach turned. Why did it feel like there was something I had to do? I stumbled to the parlor, my breath uneven, my skin clammy with sweat. The lamp stood waiting, its light unwavering, casting shifting colors across the darkened room. It had never been luck, not for my grandmother, nor for the generations before her. The wealth, the health, the unshakable prosperity of our bloodline, it had all come at a cost. A pact sealed long ago, binding our family to something ancient and merciless, a promised daughter in marriage to the one who dwelled beneath the trees. Not stolen, not sacrificed, given. A bride to bind our family to theirs, to maintain the balance, to ensure their blood remained strong. In return, our family thrived. Wealth, health, prosperity, it was never a gift. It was a contract that demanded balance, and I had unknowingly broken it. I was meant to go to them, to step willingly into the woods, just as some of my ancestors once had, but I hadn't. I had left, abandoned the house, the quiet pull of the forest, and so the debt had to be paid another way. My grandmother, no longer protected, no longer untouchable, had withered in my place. A life for a life, but the contract is still unfinished. The forest is still waiting, and it will take what is owed. The glass has changed again. My family's fortune, my grandmother's impossible health, the whispers of bad luck that seemed to follow us when we strayed too far from this land. Everything made sense now. The lamp had been telling the story all along. That's it for tonight's stories, but the nightmares never end. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a new upload. Got a scary experience of your own? Share it in the comments. I just might feature it in a future video. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember some things are scarier than they seem in the dark.